All right, well, welcome. Glad you're here. We're here to talk contracts, so I'm going to jump in. But as I do, there's a couple ground rules on certain things. One is I am going to teach things a certain way, and you may hear things from Gary or from anybody else, our field trainers or somebody else, a different way. That's fine. There's more than two ways to do things. But when it comes to contracts, there is some definition in there. There is some common understanding as to what things have to say. So that's what I am going to attempt to go over with you today. And but you may hear some things different, and if you're unsure about which path to take, pick mine. All right.
I gotta ask real quick, is that water or vodka in there?
In the morning it's water. In the afternoon it's vodka. All right. So.
We are here late today, aren't we?
Oh, I know it. All right. I am going to give you some handouts. Don't go digging too deep into it yet. Do you have some or that from last time?
I don't, no. I've got them from last time. I just don't
Okay.
have that cover sheet.
Okay. You know what? I would probably stick with
there's
follow
changes.
along if you want to.
Yeah, I'll give it back.
Yeah. So these are the most current. I spent some time over the weekend making sure everything was up to date on this because of the changes we've had recently, right? Sorry, go ahead. Jess, were you going to say something or somebody?
I did.
Oh.
I wanted to know, how long have you been with Cressy Number, and how long have you been the branch manager?
I have been, has everybody got one? Jess, you want one? On August 2nd will be my 30th anniversary with Cressy and Everett, and this is the only one I've been with. And what was the other part of that question? So how long?
How long have you been the branch manager?
That's been about going on 12 to 13 years, somewhere in that range. So I was an agent for 18 years. I actually was in a previous office. For anybody that's been around this area a long time, we used to have an office north of the mall. It is now what they call a dock in the box, right? So it's one of these urgent care physicians. That used to be our office. And I used to be able to say we were across the street from the old Chi-Chi's, but that got torn down too. And so none of that applies, you know? They tore down my office, they tore down Chi-Chi's, they tore down my high school, the old Riley High School, they tore down my hospital, St. Joe Hospital. I told that story to Bob Hawley, who was once here. He says, you better call home and make sure it's still standing.
By the way, guys, when I was a pharmaceutical rep driving around town, back in probably the early 90s, this guy right here probably had 60 to 70% of all the signs up on the front of them.
Oh, I see.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. His sign was everywhere.
For better or worse, Steve, the ones I liked the most were the ones that said under contract or pending or sold, exactly. All right, so here's another ground rule, right? Keep these in order, at least until we get done with the day. Then you can do whatever you want to with them, but if we get these out of order as we're going through them, it is going to take some time to find them back in the right spaces. We also have the 3-hole punch. For those guys that, like Steve, has his binder, right? And so for those people in our office, and if you want one, if you're not in our office, we'd be happy to get you one. But we have that 3-ring binder set up to house these contracts so that you have a guide to go to when you do write an offer. And that is music to any field trainer's ears, is if you think you're going to be writing up an offer, you've got a guide to go off of that we're going to go through today. Have you guys had .loop training? All right, so some of you have, some of you haven't, but I am going to be interloping into .loop to show you a few things. So what we're going to do is talk about the contracts, but I'm going to insert a fair number of practical tips I find is the way I would do business if I were in your shoes, and you can take those for whatever it's worth. All right? So if you want 3-ring punch, or we will also bind them with the spine and the whole thing we've got here in our office. If you would like that so they stay in order before you leave, let me know and we will get that done for you. All right. All right, so, and then this stack reads exactly as we're going to go through it. That's why I want you to keep it in order, right? So all you have to do is follow along. But I am going to highly suggest, that you write in the margins. Look, you even came with the highlight do whatever, because this is going to be of value to you after today's class. And it's kind of and can I get these back when you're done? That's how I will just, oh, yep, sorry. Didn't mean to keep you out, Kim. That way we got them for the next class. This is a bit of an information dump, and I apologize for that up front. You know, it's just, I don't know how else to do it other than break it apart, morning and afternoon session. And but what you're going to hear today is going to be good for anybody that's never been through a transaction, right? So you're going to start hearing things. Some of it may be for the first time. Anybody here already written at least one contract? Okay, great. So for you guys, and Steve, this is at least Steve's second time through this class. Today's session will mean a lot more to you. So I am going to suggest anybody that goes through it today and then gets into the business and starts working, feel free to come back. We teach these, about 3 times a year, give or take, all right? Okay, let's see here. So here's just a few other things on the cover page, right? What the contract is meant to do is give clarity to this situation. As you learned in the pre-licensing class, no oral agreements are binding, right? So everything's got to be in writing. The contracts we're going to go through, little plug here that is worthwhile, is that the contracts we use are statewide contracts, all right? You will see at the bottom, copyright, Indiana Association of Realtors, and in the upper right-hand side, on the cover page at least. So maybe left-hand side. In any event, this is what your state dues in part goes towards, right? So is to hire the counsel who then puts together these contracts. And by far and large, these are the same forms that are used all around, not just in St. Joseph County and Elkhart County, but all around the state of Indiana. For anybody that is licensed up in Michigan knows painfully that the contracts in Southwest Michigan are different than the ones in Kalamazoo. And people cross over, agents cross over, so you don't know exactly which contract you're going to be dealing with. Now, there's maybe different interpretations to the contract, but but I would say by the fact that we all largely use the same forms, there is a customary understanding as to what these concepts mean. All right? So the contracts will offer clarification to any transaction. There's a term, phrase in a ninja selling class that we teach from time to time, and the term, and I love it, I use it all the time, is agents control the process and clients control the decision. The contract is the process, right? This is how we're going to go through things. This is how it's all going to work out. When it comes to a certain field or a slot, what do you want to put in there? I might give them my 2 cents. I might say, yeah, this is priced too high. This is priced really low. I would ask for this. I would ask for that. But at the end of the day, it is their choice. Okay? So agents control the process. Clients control the decision. Always bear in mind who are the parties in the contract. And the parties are those that are going to sign their name to it. All right? Some people mistakenly kind of insert themselves into an agreement or an arrangement between two parties when in fact they are not the person who's signing on the line. Once in a while you'll hear an agent say things that indicate that they have more of a vested interest in the transaction than they actually do. So always remember, so for instance, the listing agreement. Who is the listing agreement parties to? Or the buyer agency agreement. All right? Who wants to give it a shot? All right. Go ahead. I see it on the tip of your tongue, Garrett.
Sellers in the listing agreement and the listing agent.
Close. Seller of the property and the broker. So that would be Cressy and Everett, all right? Not the agent, all right? And the same goes true for the buyer side. Buyer of the property and the broker. The agent is the conduit to get it done, but at the end of the day, it is the broker that his name is on the contract, okay? And then, of course, a purchase agreement is between a buyer and a seller. That's who's signing that contract, right? The agency agreement is between the broker and the client. So always bear in mind who are the parties to the contract, and always remember stop. If you come to me with a question or an issue or something, I am going to stop you very early on in that discussion and ask two things. One is, who are you representing? I need to know. I need a place of context. And the other thing I'm going to ask you is, bear in mind as you download this whole story to me, what is the question? Because if I know that up front, I know what I'm looking for in your story. All right, so just some thoughts. All right, let's see here. All offers need to be in writing. We talked about that. Offers need to be presented and delivered. So any offer, as lousy as it might be or off, in left field as it might be, still has to be presented to a client. There may have been one or two of you at the last sales meeting here, and I gave a demonstration of a property that an unrepresented buyer came back and said, I would like to offer them this in an email. And the question to the group was, does that constitute a formal offer? What did I receive? I received something of an offer, and I received it in writing. So technically, that might fit the definition of an offer. It's missing many, many elements of it, but so I did deliver that to the client, and they said, no, thank you. Things need to be done in a timely manner, so you are going to find that there's time frames baked into a lot of these contracts, and so we've got to be conscious of that. So we'll spend more time on that, but if somebody sends you an offer, for instance, or responds, or something for you to act on, and you're out to dinner with some friends, you have every right to enjoy, in my book, time with your friends, and you'll deal with it later on. If you're going to leave town for a week and be out of connection with your phone and so forth, that's not going to fly with your clients or people you have responsibilities to. And so be prepared to either work on your vacation or turn it over to somebody that is going to be around and willing to pitch in for you. All right? And I would suggest the later in all of that, because what's the point going on vacation if you are stuck in a room with the shades drawn, working through a septic situation while everybody else is having fun in the lake? And I went through that for an entire day, and I got out of that room by about 4 or 5 o'clock, and man, I was a bitter soul at that point. Everybody else is having fun. So think about it. Any counteroffer can be seen as a rejection. Somebody makes an offer to somebody, anything other than complete acceptance, checking the box says, we will take this, sign below. If they come back and say, we'll take everything except this one thing, that is considered a counteroffer and has an element of a rejection element in there. Ultimately, enforcing the contract will involve the power greater than us. So we are not, we understand the principles of the contract, and we might have right on our side in the argument, or our client does. But at the end of the day, we are not the sheriff. We do not enforce what it is, and if people feel that hot about it and contested about it, they're going to have to go to a judge and let the judge decide. All right? And when it comes to going to court, regardless of what was said on phone calls or intended in conversations, it is the person with the best evidence, the most complete evidence, that's getting back to contracts, right, and putting things in writing, that is going to win the day in court. All right? So I can tell you stories about that too. And then you're not supposed to share these forms with anyone. So if you are part of a sale as a paying member of the Indiana Association of Realtors, you have the right to access and use these forms. Let me say that again. As a paying member of the Indiana Association of Realtors, which is part of the three-way agreement you'll hear, local association of realtors, Indiana Association or state, and national association. These come from the state. As a paying member, you have access to use these in any transaction you are a part of. However, you cannot, your friend says, hey, I'm selling by owner, we're missing a purchase agreement, can you just give me one? To hand that over opens you up to a fine of like $2,500. The association takes it very seriously that these are for paying members. And with more and more people out there thinking they can do it all on their own, you know, that the value in that still stands more today than ever. All right, turning the page, as Bob Seger would say. I'm not going to go through all of these contract reminders, but these are all worthy of review. Everything from what is going to be left in the house, what is going to stay, and everything I am showing you on these 2 pages comes from experience, where we have had a problem with something, all right?
I'm sorry.
Take your time. Appliances.
I don't know how to work my phone.
Oh, yeah,
I thought I
right.
turned it down.
Go ahead, do what you got to do.
It's a 1866 number, so.
All right, so I'll just quickly hit these appliances in the basement. You know, those fancy finished basements. Don't forget those beverage fridges, and you know, sometimes they have more extensive appliances in the basement. Appliances currently in the house. You got a seller that is selling this house and moving to that house, and their washer and dryer. People are passionate about their washer and dryers. I don't get it, really, frankly. It's an appliance. People can come and go with their fridge and their stove to some degree, but when it comes to their washer and dryers, it is very personable. And figure it out. Think about your washer and dryer. Are you really attached to it? Okay. Other people aren't. So what they'll do is they'll take the washer and dryer from the new house because they're not as good after they get a deal put together, and they'll put those, swap them out. Seen it happen. Or the Midwesterns are famous for having a fridge in the garage. Many other places do not do that, but for one reason or another, Midwesterns need that beer fridge. And so people will take, that's usually the lesser of the two, they'll take the good one out of the kitchen and put the beer fridge in. And comes time for the walkthrough, stop the show. This is not going to happen. And so, problems. All right, and then everything down to the basketball hoops, those Gorilla hoops and stuff, you would think it's bolted down to the driveway. Some people still feel that, like the jungle gym in the back, that's not staying. And sometimes that's the fault, the lack of clarity in that is the fault of the buyer's agent, all right? Maybe not writing it into the offer, but it's also, I would say, lies on the fault of the listing agent too. That walking through the house and talking about things, yeah, is that pool table, I know you're taking the pool table with you, but what about that fancy light over it, right? The Budweiser one with the Clydesdales that they really like. Well, yeah, that goes with the pool table. Well, no, it's attached. So get clarity when you are walking through a house. And either if I'm the listing agent or I'm the buyer's agent, and I pick up on things like a projector, we are going to address that in the contract somehow. All right? Media equipment, just mentioned that, and pool table, TV above fireplace. You know those, what about the brackets or the mounts, right? So that's a big deal. All these TVs are bolted to the walls. There's a bracket. According to the contract, I'll point it out to you, but the TV mounts are supposed to remain behind. But then somebody says, well, that one fits my TV. And, you know, when they put it up, they paint it around the TV, right? And have you ever seen the lag bolts that go into the wall to mount those things? You take that stuff off, there's going to be somebody that's really sore about what's left behind if they're doing that on their final walkthrough. So always try to address these things. Again, I'm giving you a lot of information today. You've got it all in writing. But I would encourage you to review it over time, like when you're writing up your offer. Hanging mirrors, you know, in picture frames on a wire in those bathrooms, right? Rather than they used to all be mounted to the walls. Now you see many bathroom mirrors that are basically in a picture frame. Fireplace screen, smart house technologies, you know, the Ring doorbell, the Nest thermostat, and cameras. And then we don't deal a lot with water in our area. You guys in Elkhart maybe a little bit more, but the pier, pay attention to that pier because it's an expensive thing, and some of those are on wheels, right? And they're just leaned up against the shore, and maybe they're attached somehow, but those cause big fights. And again, we only know these things because we've done them. Financing, if it's a cash offer, You might need to spell out where that cash is coming from if they don't have that amount of money in the bank. Oh, it's coming from the proceeds of the sale of my house, right? Closing dates, get extensions, closing costs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. Seller concessions and seller compensation, buyer broker fee is, they're different. I'll go over that. Possession. All right, let's see. Reserved clients. So if somebody says, hey, I want to list my house with you, but I've got the neighbor has somebody that thinks they may want to buy it. So I want to reserve them, and whereas I don't pay you a commission if they end up being the ones that buy it. So if I get something like that, I say to them, that's fine, I understand where you're coming from. So if they want to buy this house, I ask, because I'm going to put a lot of time and energy and money into getting this process, the wheels in motion here. I just assume you figure it out with them first, and then when you're ready, come see me. Oh, well, we don't want to hold things up. You figure that out before you start getting me engaged. But then if they say, but they're on vacation and they're going to come back this week. So if really pressed, I might say to them, all right, I'll give you 5 days, or I'll give you 7 days. This is not going to be for the length of the contract, okay, to figure out if they are going to buy or not. Agency, we're going to go over agency, condition of property, set buyer's expectations. You know, I have a list of universal truths in my world, and one of them is everybody's idea of clean is different, all right? So people that leave a house behind, you got to kind of understand if it looks like it's going to be messy. I've seen people so much as walk through a house and it's a messy house, and they put right in the offer, house to be professionally cleaned prior to walkthrough or something like that. Or, you know, you get a real fastidious buyer and the seller is a slob, or vice versa. You know, you got a seller that's a slob and you're representing them. You got, hey man, you guys got to clean this place up. And it gets down to what they refer to as broom clean, right? You don't have to shampoo the carpet, but you ought to wipe out cabinets. You ought to wipe out the fridge. The stove ought to be somewhat clean. So just be aware of that. And then holes, if you walk through a house and there's a million decorations around, know that there's going to leave a lot of holes behind, all right? And so be aware, prep your client that says, as pretty as that looks, all the family photos and the artwork, there's going to be a lot of holes left behind. The seller is not responsible for having to do that. A good seller might fill them, and a better seller might touch them up. But, you know, you kind of see that stuff. And so just prepare the buyer. Said that is not necessarily a condition unless we write it in. All right, sloppiness of verbal offers and counteroffers. You know, people will change their mind, so just be careful of that. If you have a buyer, you've made an offer, the seller says, hey, guess what? It all looks good. They'll take that, but they haven't signed it yet. They're on vacation and they're out doing something, and they'll sign it later, and you go and tell your client, hey, guess what? They accepted it. Congratulations, we got a deal. And then another offer comes in from left field in the meantime, and it's better, and the seller says, hey, we haven't signed anything. I'm not agreeing to that previous one. Well, you said you would. Yeah, but that was all verbal, all right? So be careful so you don't disappoint people. Emails and texts can be binding, so be careful how you phrase things. For instance, this offer looks good to my client. However, it's subject to them signing it, doing a final signature on it, or something like that.
Should you print out your emails back and forth so you have a conversation log, you can stick it in your file?
I wouldn't print any of that myself. I wouldn't. I know I've got it there in my, so if I need to generate, it's like all the documents in .loop. We're supposed to keep.
Even the emails
Even the emails.
are supposed to be uploaded?
No, I would just keep them where they are, just so long as they're searchable. So let me just expand a little bit on what Beijing was just saying, is that, you know, you have a log, hopefully, of some kind. More and more it's becoming text messages, so long as you got something in writing, all right? I defer to email because it's more consistent to read and can entail a lot more detail, I think, that's easily accessible. But this is what I do. is if I am either with somebody and I'm talking to them person to person, either in the conference room or at the house or somewhere, or I'm talking to them on the phone, all those verbal communications, right? I will follow up with an email. The whole house inspection just came back and they are questioning the condition of the roof or the condition of the furnace. And the whole house inspector doesn't dig into the furnace the same way a contractor will, right? So therefore, the whole house inspector says, we recommend you get a service professional to look at it. And the buyer says, yeah, send your furnace guy out. All right, that's going to be $125, give or take. Yeah, that's fine, go ahead. But you don't follow up with them in an email or something. I say, hey, I just want to confirm you said to move forward with a furnace inspection and the cost will be roughly $125. Just hit yes to confirm or something like that. Because otherwise, all I've got is this. Otherwise, I got something in writing from them. And I do that all the time. All right. Exemptions. We'll talk about exemptions here. If you're selling a brand new construction, be aware that the total assessment is not finalized on the house. It takes a year or two for that final assessment to catch up to a brand new construction. And therefore, if you're selling it, you got to make sure that you get the best available information to figure up tax prorations is where it's at. So we're talking property taxes there. I'll go more into that later. There's some lesser known forms we're going to go over, multiple offers. You'll get into multiple offers. There's ways of addressing that. I did not include the 4/27/2016 multiple offer document, but I can get that to you. Anyways, we'll get into escalation clauses and counteroffers. All right, so moving forward, any questions so far? All right. And if you need to take a break at any point in time, just get up and walk out. That's fine. The way I'm going to do this is we're going to first start with the purchase documents because this is what you're most likely to encounter early on, as well as both buyer, if you're working with a buyer or you're working with a seller. Eventually, you're going to work with the purchase documents. So we'll cover listings in the afternoon. And I'm going to spend a great deal of time on the purchase agreement. I won't apologize for that, but that is where so much takes place is in our purchase agreements, and we'll go from there. I have this broken up, so this is one of the reasons I want you to keep everything in place. When I was started, or if I am to envision you guys, I'm thinking to myself, man, there's so much to remember, and so many documents, so much of this and so much of that. So therefore, that's why I broke it up this way and say, okay, there's a lot that's going to get thrown at you. This is what you most likely are going to have in the file and in the order that you're going to be looking at it, give or take. Any one of these might be in the file. And I've included all of this in the handouts that you have. So we're going to go through this. Any question? And then in the afternoon, I did the same table of contents with the listing docs. All right. Okay. Any questions before I jump into the purchase agreement? All right. A couple other things I want to just point out here as we go through this. Let me see here. This was we survey our clients, all right? And after the fact, both buyers and sellers, they all get surveys from a third party called Real Satisfied. This was one of the surveys that came back that I've seen, all right? And I'm just going to kind of let you read through this right here. I'll point out this was the remarks made by the client, all right? right, got it? All right, so here's the lesson from, this is not from me as the branch manager, this is from a client saying this, right? And so the part I really want to, number one, a lot of this has to do with communication. As advanced as we are in culture and technology and every other way, so many problems still stem from bad communication or lack of communication, all right? And what further kind of annoys me about this or bothers me is often her text messages would be effective, hey, I sent you this, and this is the client's in brackets, multi-page, highly important and technical real estate document. Take a look at it, let me know what you think, right? My feeling was, hey, why don't you take a look at it and let me know what you think, right? This is what I'm hiring you for. So in today's world, what is so easy to pull in documents, fill them in, and shoot them off to a client and ask them to sign a commitment for, I don't know, take your pick, $300,000 commitment, right? Without you going through it with them, there is no excuse to that. That's what you're getting paid to do, right? I'm not saying you have to read it word for word to the client, but you better have a firm handle on what the document says, what are the high points, and so as I'm going through it with you, I may role play with myself to say this is how I explain it when I'm in front of people, all right? So I'm going to be toggling back and forth here. All right, so this is the our purchase agreement. When I'm going through this with you, it is both from the perspective of myself writing it for a buyer, as well as myself as a listing agent presenting it to a seller. So sometimes I'm going to play different roles here depending on which side of the equation we're talking, all right? But let's say in this instance, I've put myself as the selling broker, right? Selling broker means the buyer's agent. So I have, for instance, in .loop, I have my templates all set up, and I'll show you a little bit of like that in a moment. But if I am writing an offer, I'm always on the selling broker side. So I pre-fill that, okay? All right, and then moving through, so I put together the date that it's assigned, all right, what their names are. And the way I will do this, just to give you, like I said, if I'm working as a buyer's agent, we go out and look at a house. They're hot for it. I know, because we already looked at it one other time, and this time they brought a bunch of people with them, and we showed it to them, and they said, yeah, let's go write this thing up. Great. It's right around lunchtime. Why don't you guys take a minute and go grab something to eat, or go walk the dog or something. If I can, I put a little space between me so I can go back to the office, write this thing up with as much infill as I can get. I'm leaving a number of blanks, but I'm going to get it prepped, because then my meeting with them goes faster and easier, because I'm already halfway there. So I will fill this in. The way I will do this is I will then print it, a partial contract, sit down with them in the conference room, and we are going to go through this together, and I am going to mark it all up with their decisions. Here is the process. Now give me your decisions, all right? And so that's how I operate that. If they are remote and I'm writing a contract, I will get on a Zoom call. So I get a Zoom account. Anybody can get a free one. You get 1 free hour or 40, 50 minutes, whatever it is. That may or may not be enough time to go through a contract the way I do, but in any event, I get everybody from different parts on that Zoom call, and this can go for listings as well. And then I share my screen. So now I've got it nice and big on the Zoom call with that little spotlight, anode, whatever they call that, and then I just flow around and I point things out to them. That is, to me, almost as good as sitting at the kitchen or dining room table going through it. Okay? So now I've already done things. So buyer's name. Hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, do you use A middle initial in formal documents. This is how you're going to take title. Yeah, I always use my middle initial. Or no, you know, they call me Matt, but my real name is John. You know, you get that stuff all the time. So don't make an assumption. I might also look at their name here versus the one on the pre-approval letter, just as a matter of reference. Property address. So we've got the address, the township, put all of that in. And then when it gets down here to legal description, so this is what they refer to as an abbreviated legal. You know, maybe from class, the real legal is this long, right? This is just an abbreviated one right here. So what I have done on this is legal description is lots 4 and 5, except 5 feet on the west side of lot 5, Wickham's Manor, whatever that is. This is where you've got to take a minute, right? So agents have the responsibility of helping their client do a little bit of due diligence in the process. So when I'm writing up an offer, I take, with regards to the listing agent, a trust but verify approach. So I see what they've written on their contract, but you know what? I'm going to dig in a little bit, and I'm just going to kind of mess around in there from my perspective and make sure that they've got a number of things right. And the legal description, or at least partially, is what I'm after. Let me give you a couple examples of where things went awry in things not being done correctly necessarily here. The first one was I sold a property out on Lincoln Way across from Jim's Diamonds. It actually used to be the Dunkin' Donuts many years ago, and it's across from the old landing and IUSB. Think of Lincoln Way by the river. Anyways, I get a call from a seller that I represented on that about 3 or 4 years ago and says, hey, Quinn, the buyer of the property that we sold is up for tax sale, that property. What am I supposed to do here? Because I'm getting notices. It's like, hey, don't worry about it. Let me find out. But they should be noticing the person that is, whose name is on the tax deed. And then she got another notice, says, hey, I'm getting a second notice. So I said, send it to me. So I took it and I went over to the place, which is now a barbershop or a hair salon. And I said, hey, this is going on. They don't speak English, or at least they didn't to me. And so I said, hey, you need to be aware of this. And they just didn't want to talk to me, you know. It's like, no, you do want to pay attention to this because your property's up for tax sale. So finally, I turned around. The agent that had helped them, I thought was long gone, but I tracked her down and I said, hey, you need to get this to your client. She says, yeah, I know you stopped by. They didn't know what you were doing. They thought that you were doing something that you weren't supposed to. I said, no, I'm trying to. She says, I know that. And so she got it straightened out. And what had happened is, let's see here. One of the things I do is I go to a site called MACOG, Michiana Area Councils of Governments. Now there's a number of places you can find aerial views of properties. This is one of them that I go to. So I go to this maps and data, all right? And that takes me here. And then property viewer, I click on that property viewer. I did this because the site can sometimes be slow. And so, so I went on in and look around. What had happened on this particular sale, this is the property right here. Here's the river. There's Diamond Jim's. Here's Lincoln Way. And here's the property. It sits on 2 lots. But somehow and I went back in my notes to the purchase agreement and to everything, and we had it right. But the title company somehow did not get lot 2, somehow did not get transferred properly or noticed properly. So what was happening is this lot right here was just fine. So they had been paying their taxes all along. They hadn't been paying attention that they should have been paying taxes on this one all along. It came up for a tax sale. People that search tax sale have various motivations, and one of them could be, I'm not saying everyone, but one of them could be, they drive by and they say, boy, that building is on 2 lots. They're not going to split that up. I'm going to buy that in tax sale, and they're going to redeem it from me, and I make a whopping percent interest on the money that I put into it. And so we got that one cleared up. But that's where not having the proper abbreviated legal description or paying attention to a property that might have 2 lots on it. Let me give you one more example, and I'm ashamed to say, but this one happened in-house, all right? So if you've been into the MLS, you know that this is a MLS sheet. This is a listing sheet, right? So it is a listing that we have, and the buyer's agent brings a buyer to it, right? And so they go through this, and they're looking it up, and they write an offer based on what they're seeing right here. I want to point out that the listing agent had put in lot 30, Alwards Addition, this home, but so this says lot 30, so it shows 1 lot here, right? This should have been the first red flag for anybody. And then in the remarketing part say, this home sits on a double-sized lot with a fenced backyard. Okay, so, and then I'm also looking at the lot size 40 by 120. I'm saying a double lot is not going to be 40 wide. Okay, so far, if I'm the buyer's agent, I am, that trust but verify element in me is going off here. And I'm looking, so, but the listing agent was told there was a double lot, but didn't really look into it any deeper. And the buyer's agent just took their word for it. And this is the house. Okay, so it's a fenced double lot, you know, fence and garage, all the rest of that. These are the marketing photos, so they're showing how this all looks. And this is the way the property was written in the purchase agreement. She wrote it up just the way it was on the listing, right? But in reality, it was these 2 lots right here were both should have conveyed. But all that happened because all that everybody went through was the 1 lot here, and because this is that fenced yard that they just showed in the photos, right? So this is all one. It did not convey. So when this person went to sell and did some preliminary title work, they realized that the second lot never conveyed. It sold in the tax sale. There's a question about whether they had been noticed properly or not. And we had to go in and buy that second lot off of the person that picked it up in the tax sale. Yeah, it was a mess. And so mistakes can be made. But all it would have taken by either the listing agent or the buyer's agent was a simple few clicks to that MACOG site or other places to realize there's more to this than that.
Quinn, do you ever use the tax site to determine your legal by searching just solely name and seeing what they own, or do you just search by address in the tax site at all?
So there's a couple, yeah, so you guys went through MLS training, or some of you did, right? Okay, so I don't know where Jody directed you, but let me show you a couple things right here, all right? So right here, so I've already logged in. This is our Association of Realtors, right? And I'm going to go into the actual MLS. And if I go under tax, all right, see this right here? So bear in mind where I'm at. Tax, CRS data search. All right. Somebody give me an address. 1516. Boy, that sounds familiar. 1516. I think I've walked by this house. All right, see how it autofills right there? Again, I got through this through the multiple listing service. Okay, so what does this show me? This shows me where that property is. I could get into the satellite version if I want to. And then it gives me a great summary of different things. You know, for instance, who owns it right here, all right? It can get me to the property record card. So I can view this property record card here. And what this tells me is who the owner is, the history of transfers, I should say, all the way back. This one goes back to 84. It also shows me some other things, what they paid for it at any given time. This shows me the valuation. This is assessor information. This is not the appraisal information. This is assessor, so for tax purposes. And by the way, this right here is called what's called a property record card. Every township will have a property record. Every property in every township, and that includes Michigan. That's much harder to get, like Milton Township and some of these Van Buren County and stuff. But I know every property will have a property record card. So up there, I have to contact the assessor directly. We're fortunate down here, we can just access it the way I just showed you. The other things that I'm not going to go through all of this. This will give me an approximate lot size right here, calculated acreage, 0.33. It'll give me the property dimensions. You know, it tells me when the year the house was built. It shows me square footage. So this is a ranch, one-story ranch. That's 2,064 square feet. Sometimes if there's a second floor or a basement, they'll add it all up together. So anyways, this is one piece of information that I get. And
What did you click on to get to that? Oh, number 8 says scorecard.
Yep, right here. View County. Now, the other way I get there, this is the St. Joseph County assessor site. I bookmarked this on my computer. I need a fast draw into who lives where or what's going on there. I can get there in just a few clicks, even if I'm not in the MLS. Same deal. And I would argue this might hold a little bit more. So what was that address again on Woodmont? 1516 Woodmont. A lot of it carries through to similar information. This one gets me back to that property record card I just showed you. It's also going to take me to the taxes, so I can get there. Again, there's overlap in these two sources of information. You'll get down to a rhythm of where you're looking. The whole point of this is, though, because you've got it bookmarked or you know how to get into it fast, right? It's not onerous to have to go in and do a little trust but verify on some of this information. That is what you're being paid for in part, by the way. We'll welcome John. John, how are you doing?
Quinn, can I give you another address for a second?
Sure.
Plug it in.
So this one I'll do through the assessor site.
Great. 1234. Oak Ridge.
It sounds so cool.
That one sounds familiar too. All right, so it's auto-filled, not White Oak, but 1234 Oak Ridge. Yours truly.
And then you could do the aerial with, yep.
Okay.
There you go, exactly where Quinn's mouse is.
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah, look at this convenient little jog right here. Did somebody look up from their paper when they were drawing that out, or what?
So back to what Quinn was saying about you guys bringing value. You're not supposed to be the experts, right? So you're not, you don't look at the stuff and you make a statement as to what is and what isn't. But when you look at the property and you look at that jog here, you go, hey, that's unusual. Well, the reason why is because there was an encroachment. So you mean that the corner of that garage is quite a few feet into the other property.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, it says, hey, we better have documentation about this, right? Or the buyer, I don't know, that we're walking into a little bit unusual situation. Nothing else. Again, you don't represent that it's a problem, or you don't represent that it's solved, or anything like that. It's just that because it's your house. And, you just put it on.
It wasn't always like that, right? It used to go straight across, so he had to work that out with the neighbor.
Hey, Clint, what would be the official, abbreviated legal description? Do you come up with that, or where do you find? I've never done a listing contract.
Yeah, so right here, that same card that I showed you,
Yep.
and it's right here, lot 92,
I got you.
and yes.
Of the whatever subdivision. Wait, whatever where are you it is. seeing that?
The property card.
All right, yeah. I'm getting to it. So this is the full screen, right? And this is what's interesting, right? So this is, of course, is John's house. And here's the legal description right here, right? plus the December 15, 2014 encroachment. They wrote it right into the legal description. Not to be confused.
So when you, if you're working for a buyer, would you be looking for some kind of documentation that that encroachment is sound? Or?
You know, it's in the legal description now. There's high likelihood there's something in the title work about it that this took place. It's where sometimes it can get funny though, like shared driveways become a problem at times. They really aren't a problem because the two people get along, but you know, in the banker's eyes or something like that, there can be an issue. So.
But if that encroachment's not on the legal description, then you would try to get some kind of documentation.
Yeah, there's various ways to deal with an encroachment. We'll get into that when we're talking surveys though. Okay.
They'll want the joint driveway agreement between parties.
There you go.
Mowing, who's gonna be doing the improvement, 50/50,
Right.
however it is.
Yep.
It has to be unified.
Okay. So Betty Jean has a great point. There's a joint driveway agreement,
Right.
and that does the title company usually have one of those?
Or even amongst themselves, as long as there's something in the file. But then, does it go from, now we're selling, is the new person gonna agree to this?
Yeah, right.
Right?
Right. That's a good question.
No, I'm not paying for anything, I don't just have yours.
All right. All right. Let's get on with this. Everybody understands that now. Now the next few lines, this is what's going to be included with the sale. All right. So we have a lot of pre-printed stuff. So the heating and air conditioning, so the furnace and air is going to be included. That's all good. And then, you know, the window shades and blinds and curtain rods and drapery poles and fixtures, the ceiling fans and light fixtures, towel racks and bars, and all that, right? And then, you know, the all wall mounts, you want to talk about TVs and wall mounts, right? Storage barns, landscaping, and so forth. Even has in here, for instance, the water softener, water purifier, so that would be what, an RO system maybe, and so on. And then I've put in the refrigerator, range, dishwasher, microwave, washer and dryer currently in the house. So if I...
The water softener on the sales disclosure, if it's rented or owned?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a moment though. Bar beverage cooler, media room projector, and related media equipment, all light fixtures, ceiling fans, window treatments currently in the house. Now you'll notice that I restated several things that were already up here for clarity's sake. All right, so for instance, there's a really nice dining room fixture, and we want to make sure that's there. Or the pool table light, like I was talking about. All of those types of things. So it doesn't hurt to address it a second time so that everybody gets drawn attention to it. All right? Betty Jean, what was your question again?
The water softener, if it's owned or rented.
Okay. Although you had stated that it's on the seller's disclosure, it's checked one way or the other, owned or rented. This brings up a really good point. What is in the purchase, what is in the MLS sheet as far as staying and going or anything else, or what is checked on the seller's disclosure form, which we'll come to after a while, none of that is binding unless it's here in the purchase agreement. So if you're not sure, put it in the purchase agreement.
Or you can say like, water softener rented in parentheses.
So that would be excluded, all right? Include leased items right here. So for instance, seller wants to keep the cameras and security system, the garage shelving, and the pool table light, right? So this is where a sharp listing agent will know, hey, they aren't leaving that behind, or a buyer's agent is looking, all right? So when in doubt, put it in there. Do not rely that the MLS, well, it was in the MLS sheet. You know, if it's not in the purchase agreement, there's a disconnect and a problem. All right? And it even states it right here. The terms of this agreement will determine what items are included or excluded, not the seller's disclosure form, multiple listing service, or other promotional materials. And as far as those items that are remain, will be fully paid for and owned by the seller. There's only a couple things that get quirky. Water softeners are one of them. We don't see as many rented water softeners as there used to be. But occasionally there's a rented water heater too, and you can usually identify them because they're those really big ones, right? And they're many gallons, and they're so enormous. Like, how did they ever get this thing down here? And what those are rented from the electric company, and they charge up overnight in off-peak hours, and they charge up a large quantity of hot water. And then the owner just pays a fee to the electric company. That's who owns it. All right? Stop me if you guys have questions. All right. This just states that the buyer, we're getting the square footage from those public records, all right? And so I am not going out measuring every property, either as listing agent or as the buyer's agent. And so we're just relying on the information we've been given by the seller and through public records to be true and accurate. All right. Price, 31. So again, this is one of those I probably leave blank until I'm sitting down with them and writing it in. All right. What is it you want to offer? Now, sometimes what I'll do in presenting an offer is like, hey, let's just leave that one go for now. We talked a little bit about price. Let's go through the rest of the 9 pages of contract, and we'll circle back to this so that we have it all squared away. But if somebody knows, and then the other thing is when it comes to price, and one of those things I can do rather quickly in the MLS is, I'll just show you, and I don't mean to waste anyone's time here, but I'm just going to give you a quick idea. So I'm sitting with somebody in the conference room. What should we offer on this house? Do a quick abbreviated market analysis for a neighborhood. Somebody give me a neighborhood. Swanson Highlands. All right. That's not what I want. So search residential. All right, so Swanson Highlands has single-family homes. All right, and that's in St. Joseph County. And I'm doing active, pending, sold. All right, I should have had somebody time me on this. And let's go back to June 6th, June 1st. All right, I'm going back 1 year plus. All right, and I know generally in Swanson Highlands, I'm going to fall anywhere between 100,000 and 350. Big range, but all right. And I'm going to do a quick map search. Who could tell me where Swanson Highlands is, other than Jess? Off Cleveland, that's right. All right, so we got right there, Swanson Highlands. Okay. So I'm going to do a quick drawing for this buyer I'm sitting with. All right, so I would say I don't want to get up. This starts getting into Iron Gate. So I don't want to get in Iron Gate, and this is Highland Drive right here, down here. All right, that would be somewhat comparable. 18 properties. All right, some of them are active. Let's say we're looking at one of these. This is just one technique I use. I go to this, what's called CMA Summary View, CMA Summary Report right here. Yeah, I don't want to get too deep in here, but so I'll show you. Yep. So here's your reports. All right, but here's the thing. Going down here to CMA, so your reports will already be set up with certain favorites. Everybody see that? backstory to this is when we merged MLSs years ago, every association and every agent on the committee, which I was one of them, but I was a reasonable guy, right? And so was very territorial about merging the MLSs, but keeping the reports that we're used to. Bloomington had certain reports, and Evansville had certain reports, and Elkhart, and St. Joseph County, and everybody wanted, so therefore, you'll see this was a South Bend report right here. But so you'll only get a few in your favorites. And then I go down here to CMA. If you go down there, you'll see CMA summary report. If you star it, it will throw it up in your favorites. So I keep it there, all right? And this is it right here. So let's say we're considering one of these active properties right here, and I've customized this a little bit. I'd be happy to walk you through that sometime too. But it gives me the basic information, the address, bedrooms, baths, basement, car, garage, lot size, and so on. But then all the way over here, it gives me list price per above grade finished square feet, above grade. So the average of the two that are out there is $185 a square foot, but these two have a little bit difference. Now if I go down here to the solds, right? So if I go all the way down, I've got 14 solds in that area that I showed you. And on average, they're going for $154 a square foot, all right? Right here. So the average right under the 14, but that's the average. And what's that 154 showing me? Sale price per above grade finished square feet. And it goes down, and sometimes what I do is, again, I'm showing you how I'm running a fast market analysis because people are saying, am I paying too much? Am I paying too little? Is this priced right? Is this not? I'm giving a 40,000 foot view. Here's what's going on in the neighborhood, and here is where the one you're looking at fits into it. Now, there's a whole lot more that goes into this, as I will, if we ever do a market analysis, we're supposed to do a CMA session. I don't know who's teaching CMAs.
Jen is tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken.
Jen Lister, okay. So she has one way of going about it. I have a little bit different way of going about it. But anyway, that's how you can quickly look at, hey, am I offering the right price here? Now, I don't read the contract to people, but there are certain things, and I would ask that you highlight, maybe the numbers on the side of here for this particular one, because this is one I will read to people. So here's the price you're offering. Now, it has to appraise for that, okay? So if the buyer obtains an appraisal of property, this agreement is contingent upon the property appraising at no less than the agreed upon purchase price. If appraised value is less than the agreed upon purchase price, buyer retains the option to proceed towards closing at the agreed upon purchase price. If buyer is not willing or able to proceed at the agreed upon purchase price, then either party may terminate this agreement or parties may mutually agree to amend the agreed upon price. Basically says it has to appraise at what the purchase price you put together, and if it doesn't, the deal may fall apart unless everybody comes to an agreement on how we're going to do this. All right? So that's an important one.
That's the appraisal contingency?
Yes. Yep. And so anyway, so that is, it needs to appraise at, by the way, when the buyer does not order the appraisal, right? The bank does, right? So the buyer will bring the purchase agreement into the lender and say, hey, I did find a house. I want to make formal application right now. And so they do. And so the lender has a copy of the purchase agreement. When they turn around and order it from the appraiser, right? The appraiser has a copy of the purchase agreement. When they walk through the door, they're not there to pick a number out of the air. They're there to kind of hit that number. Am I right on that?
Yeah, 6 months and 2 mile radius.
6 months, they'll go back, whereas I went back 1 year, and
They only go back 6 months.
appraiser only go back 6 months, so you got to be aware of that. But anyways, so most of the time, back to the appraisal component of this purchase agreement. It needs to appraise out. All right,
But on the flip side, you know, they're asking for more, and there is that escalation clause. And sometimes even as a lender, I'm like, this house sold for X amount, and you're gonna pay like 40 or 50 grand more. Well, it's a competitive market. You have to do what you have to do. I said, what improvements did they make? Just the hardwood floor, that could be X amount. Anyway, I was figuring, and he goes, in this climate, when there's multiple offers, I'm willing to go the extra. And I'm gonna pull out of my 401k. It's fine.
so your buyer was saying that.
Yeah,
Okay.
40 more than
Okay.
it was worth
All right.
to have a house.
Well, that's their choice.
Yeah.
All right. Earnest money, we'll talk about escalation clauses and appraisal gaps in a moment, but earnest money, so in this case, it's $3,000. Do not get involved in high amounts of earnest money unless it's a super high price house, all right? I'm telling you, because the more earnest money involved, if there is a fall through, by the way, of all the sales that we've got of houses that go under contract, 90% of them close. 90% will make it to the finish line. 10% will not. All right? And those 10% have money on the line. And the question is, what happens to that earnest money? What's the fate of it? All right? And so that is where it gets tricky. If it's a clear reason why it fell through and the earnest money is supposed to go in this direction, fair enough, and everybody agrees to that. That's most of the time what happens. But occasionally, so of that 10%, a majority know which way the earnest money is supposed to go. Then there's a smaller percentage that says, no, we're going to fight over it. And they are more likely to fight over it if it's a high number. Let me just tell you. So it gets real sticky so have enough down that it makes sense and you shows serious interest from the client, but not so much that people will go sideways and then argue over it. And then earnest money should be delivered, and I would say within 24 to 48 hours, 1 or 2 days after acceptance. And generally speaking, it is held by the listing broker. All right? So any transactions where we have the listing, we hold the earnest money in our escrow account. Okay? If you have a buyer for a property and that listing agent says, no, we don't hold the earnest money, send it to the title company, say thanks but no thanks. If you are not willing to hold the earnest money as a listing broker in your escrow account, we will hold it in our escrow account. Everybody got that? So you will find in an MLS sheet, for instance, where under the agent remarks, the agent will say, have the earnest money go to the title company. And I'm going to acknowledge that and say, all right, I understand where you're coming from, but rather than the title company, if you are not willing to hold it, then we will hold it. All right? And what it gets down to is what happens if there's an argument over it. We have far more control over not that we're going to go and side with somebody that we shouldn't, but we just have the ability to process it out faster than a title company will. All right? So talk about disbursement. So earnest money is a deposit on the house. It'll show up on the day of closing as money you've already put towards the deal. All right? In the event of a fall through, by the way, 90% of our transactions make it to the finish line, 10% do. But in the event of a fall through, if it's due to a condition of the contract, for instance, we don't get an appraisal, a favorable appraisal, and the parties can't come to an agreement on that, that's a condition of the contract. Therefore, the buyer would get the earnest money back. If it doesn't, you can't get financing. If we can't come to an agreement on repairs, those are all conditions of the contract. If you as a buyer just get into this and then you change your mind and you want out due to no condition of the contract, there's a chance you're going to forfeit that earnest money. Okay? And this just goes on a little bit to talk about what the remedy is. There is what we refer to in the business as the 60-day letter, that if there is a fight over it, we send both parties letters that say, hey, we're going to distribute this earnest money in this direction. The party that's not due to receive it can file suit, and then we'll let a judge determine it. And that's where having everything in writing, having backups, All that stuff comes into play. Okay, any questions so far? All right, anybody needs to take a break? All right, we'll take 5.
So is that our company policy to hold it
Well, we have an hour.
with either our brokerage or their brokerage, but not the bottom? Is that our policy or?
I would say that's our policy.
The title company would prefer not to get involved.
Title company doesn't want it. They will as a service.
But they would prefer not to, because they're not gonna be able to decide, or they won't have some of this other.
They're not bound by the 60-day letter. So if the two parties, I don't know what their remedy is, but yeah. All right, let's see what we got here.
Boy, there's so much fine print in these contracts.
So what you mean by that is the title company, if they can't come to an agreement, the title company has to wait on dispersing the money until the judge decides who gets the money?
Well,
Who
it's-
gets the money? What is that?
It's the process. So when the way our language is written, the list, whoever's holding the earnest money can make a desktop, let's call it, decision on who's not performing and say, listen, somebody's clearly not doing their part of this. Therefore, we believe the earnest money ought to go in this direction. All right. And we're going to send out a notice by certified mail to all parties that this is the way we think it ought to go. However, the other party has 60 days to go down to the small claims court and file suit and say, stop the show. They're going to send the money over there. I believe I'm entitled to it, and so I'm filing suit. And then all parties have to go there. We don't do it. That stops the 60 days. If nobody does anything in 60 days, then we deliver the earnest money where we said we were going to deliver it.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Title company is,
We're not involved with that small claims department.
You mean the agent or
The
the brokerage?
brokerage is not involved in the small claims court?
usually not, because we get back to who is the agreement between the buyer and seller, and so it's between them. However, they may turn to their agent and say, you know, you were part of this, all right? Now, it's usually not that we're not dragged into it necessarily, but what we need to do is provide our client with all the documents, because believe it or not, they don't have it all, right? So they can't find the signed agreement, they can't find what was said about this or that. And you may have been relaying information to your client that led to this thing falling through, so you're got to be ready to provide that to them.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, I'm going to carry on. I know she's coming back. Method of payment. So you're going to choose one way for method of payment. So if it's cash, that'd be the first one. So that's where, you know, somebody has the money or will have the money to show up to closing with all those funds. Line 62 says that the buyer will provide proof of funds. They're either doing it with the offer or within so many days of acceptance. If I were on the listing side of an equation and presented with an offer, I would want that proof of funds with the offer, because we're going to make a decision and we want to confirm you've got the money. Where it gets tricky is if the agent says, well, they don't have the money like in an account right now, they're going to get it from the proceeds of their house. And so then that opens up a whole nother discussion. All right? So proof of funds, what does that look like? So I am seeing more screenshots of something that says there's money somewhere, right? But that was never what we usually in the past have agreed is reasonable proof of funds. So most people, not everybody, but most people can probably log into their account, and they've maybe it's been a long time since they've seen a paper statement, but those paper statements generally are still being produced. You just have to dig into your account and provide one. So something that has the institution's name on it, it looks like a legit statement, has the whoever's on the purchase agreement's name on it, right? So don't give me somebody else's name if you're buying it. I need to be able to tie the two together. And so something along those
They
lines.
could black out or their account number.
That's right. They can redact the account number so nobody knows. And we don't need to know everything that you've got.
Yeah, your name, the bank, and how much is.
We just need to know that you got the money to cover this amount. That's what we need to know. All right? So that, and then with a cash offer, so that's providing proof of funds, and then the buyer still has the option to get an appraisal. So a third party to give an opinion of value. One of the, if in a multiple offer situation, where one of them is a cash offer, that is usually one of the deciding factors versus getting financing, and one of them is if they're going to waive off the appraisal. And that's why they've got that line in there. It's like, okay, you say you're going to go cash, therefore there's no lender that's going to require the appraisal, but we unfortunately used to work under the assumption that so therefore you're not going to get an appraisal. Now we make them state. You are or not, you're paying cash, are you or will you not get an appraisal? Now, new mortgage, so completion of this transaction is contingent upon buyer's ability to obtain a different type of mortgage, right? So I, in this case, check the box, insured conventional. All right, so what's the difference between a conventional and insured conventional? Come on, Betty Jean, you got to help me out here.
Conventional, insured, conventional?
Percent down, right?
Oh, yeah, the PMI part.
Private mortgage insurance. So anybody that produces less than 20% is going to sign up for PMI. All right. So in this case, I said they're going to get a mortgage loan for 95% of the purchase price. Therefore, they're putting 5% down. Payable, I just put in 30 years with an original interest rate not to exceed, and I put in 8%. So at this point in the game, remember, the buyer has been in to talk to the lender, either by phone or some way, but they've generated a pre-qualification letter, let's call it, all right? They have not locked into an interest rate yet. The lender will not lock a buyer into a rate until they make formal application, and in order to make formal application, you need an identified property with a purchase agreement. That is when they lock them in, right? Okay. Yes, but they probably have an idea of what the going rate is, as should you. You should have a sense as to where are rates today.
Yeah, you just go to bank rate or something.
Yeah, you just had to get an idea. And what this number right here is, this interest rate is not to exceed. So if today's rates are, say, 7.25, give or take, right? In the event something really big happens and rates spike overnight, right, which we have seen, as rare as they are, instances where that's happened, if suddenly what you thought you were going to get and now you go to make application and it's far above that, you have the chance to rethink this thing because now your payment just moved and maybe to an uncomfortable place.
And it could be that they're not eligible now. You're not
Yes.
approved.
Right. So what you, in this line right here, you want to know approximately where the current rate is and probably round it up by at least a half, 3/4%, something like that.
Real quick question on that. If it does go above that, will we just have to do an amendment?
Well, they have to get an updated pre-approval letter for you.
Yeah, I mean, from, so
It could
that,
be that now all of a sudden the dude went and got a car and the rent went up. He's a fish out of water.
yeah. But to Garrett, to your point, let's say we are putting together the offer today, and within 5 days, the interest rate went from there to there. Yeah, you could get an amendment, but if they jump that much, if you only put in 1/4% or pegged it right at what the current rate is, then yeah, you shouldn't have done that, right?
Yeah, and as a friendly reminder, you said, yeah, I'm glad you're just a reminder, I'm sure your lender said something, but don't do anything. Don't buy a car, don't rent this, don't go buy here, pay here. Then it's, if they have a $500 or $600 payment, that's $70,000 worth of house money they can't get.
All right.
Does the buyer need to amend the contract if they have an 8.5 interest rate?
Well, by the time they actually go sit down, yeah, I would think so. Yeah. I will tell you, most agents in our marketplace aren't even aware what the significance of that line, and I don't know that they fill it in very well. A sharp agent will understand the purpose of the line and fill it in accordingly, and that's why you guys are here.
Annum actually mean?
What's that?
Annum? What is annum?
Annum is another word for annual, per annually.
Per year.
Okay.
Yep, per year. All right. If it is FHA, of course, this is, if you check the FHA box, what is this number going to be? FHA is how much down? 3.5%, so that'd be 96.5, right? If somebody is going with the conventional, they're more than likely going to read at least 80 right there. You don't have to get super detailed on this because that's going to be between the buyer and the lender. But the listing side is going to want to get at least a picture of what's going on. Are you an insured conventional like an FHA or a VA, or are you a conventional with 20% down?
USDA in some of our areas, right? So there's no, real development.
Yes, USDA is a thing, more so in Elkhart County, I think, than St. Joseph County, but it can be out there. All right. So this is, again, this is completion of this transaction shall be contingent upon. This is one of those contingencies for lending. All right, and then going down here, time allowed for financing. So the buyer's going to make an application for the loan within 5 days after acceptance of the agreement, and that includes having the lender order the appraisal at that same time. And then no more than 30 days will elapse before they'll get written mortgage approval. Okay? All right. You might, in the margins of this, say if it's 30 days, that'd be more for like a conventional or insured conventional. If it's FHA or VA, you're probably going to want to get anywhere between 30 and 45 days. Okay?
Said FHA and VA?
Yep.
They take longer.
They take a little bit longer, right? All right. Let's just talk a little bit real quick about financing. And I know we can go down this rabbit hole, but when you're talking to people, right, this appraisal, we've talked a little bit about the appraisal. This offer is going to be subject, most likely, to some kind of inspections taking place. Those are optional inspections. When they get those results, you know, there's a buyer that chooses to request certain things and seller that will say yes or no to things. When the lender is assigning this and there's an appraiser that gets assigned to this, all right? So I already described kind of what the appraiser is going to go do. So the bank does not go out to the house, right? They send a professional out to the house to say, what are we loaning money on? We're loaning lots of money. What is it? So they go on out and they physically measure it up. They take pictures. They come back with an extensive report and so forth. And part of that report is not determining value, but verifying value, right? When it's a government-backed loan, there's a little more to it, right? So they do the same thing, but they also have this short checklist of things if it's FHA or VA, right? So condition of property is one of those things. And they want to make sure things such as the roof has at least 2 years life left on it, or there's no cracked or broken glass, or if it has over 2 steps, there's a handrail. Chipping and peeling paint's a big deal, all right? So they are not, don't ever confuse the appraiser as the inspector. Go get an inspection done if you want an inspection. They are there to check off a conditions list. Betty Jean, anything?
Yes, if they say deferred maintenance, meaning if they haven't touched it, it's a deal breaker.
Yes. So, and why are they doing that? Because one thing, the buyer is putting less money down, right? And so if they get this property back, statistics show people with less skin in the game may be more likely to walk away. So the bank may get this back. We want to make sure this thing is in somewhat decent shape. The other thing is because they're putting so little down, FHA or VA, for instance, the assumption is they don't have a lot of money to fix something up after they get done purchasing, right? And so they want to make sure it's in certain conditions. If those items are not dealt with, the deal is off. Remember, the other set of inspections are optional and negotiable. If it doesn't happen, this deal's not going to happen. Now, what is somewhat optional is who does them. So I one time had a house, and you know how you've got the cinder block and then the siding starts, and somebody had painted the foundation around there, right? And it was chipping and peeling, and the lender said, everything's good, but somebody's got to deal with that chipping and peeling paint. So the seller says, I'm not doing it. Buyer says, we'll do it. And so they went on over there, they put down drop cloths, scraped it clean, painted it, the appraiser went back, everything's good to go. So it does not mean that the seller necessarily has to do the work just has to be done. All right.
We purchased our house FHA way back when, not our current one, but our first house together, and then we sold FHA, and one of the conditions of selling FHA was we had to scrape all of the paint off of our garage that had been peeling and repaint that, so it's, gotta have it done if you wanna
Yep.
play our game.
And the appraisal has pictures, so they're not supposed to be the inspector, but they have to make a note of it. Peeling paint, you'll see the photo, so
Yeah.
there's nothing to hide,
Yep.
you know? And then there's an appraisal review test too. And they review, and the appraisers just go by who's ever up next. They can't say, let's send Joe, because he always brings in a good number that's worked that way.
Yeah. All right. So since we're on that topic, if you ever do come across a garage that has chipping and peeling paint, and it needs to be, right? One thing you do not want to do is send somebody out there with a power washer, all right? And they will blast those chips everywhere around that yard. If they're scraping and painting to be done, they capture that stuff. Remember, they're after lead-based paint, potentially lead-based paint issues, right? If you ever attend a lead-based paint test, they test the areas on the woodwork and the painted areas, and if they're doing the outside, they'll also test the soil. Because if you've ever seen the overhangs from the soffits and the siding, right, that stuff goes down. And who plays in the dirt around the house, right? Kids do. Yeah. Yep. And so if you blast that all around the yard and it gets picked up on by people, there could be a big problem there. All right. So that
I
is,
have a question.
yep.
Okay, so the buyer is gonna go and do the work themselves. How do we get to that spot with contracts and stuff?
Well, that would have to be, if everybody said, okay, the buyer can go out and scrape that foundation, right, and repaint it. I'm going to get something in writing from the seller that gives them permission to go do it. We're going to figure out who's paying for the supplies. We're going to have the buyer say, hey, I waive off all liability of this. And I use that foundation as a good example, but if somebody were up on a roof or something or on a ladder, that could get tricky. There's a liability element there, right? And so just be careful. And one of the things that even before you get to this point ought to be between a listing agent and they are listing a house and determining, hey, could this go FHA or VA? And a buyer, sharp buyer's agent that's going to look around and say, this will never go FHA or VA. And who knows if the seller is going to be willing to do it. Okay? All right. Okay, so seller contributions. Two different ones here. The first one is seller concessions, all right? So in other words, the seller to provide up to a certain dollar amount or percentage to be used towards the buyer's closing costs and prepaids, all right? So what's that mean? It means a buyer is going to make an offer, and they say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I got good job history, I got good credit. And I've got my down payment, right? So it's a 3.5% or a 5% or whatever that down payment amount is. I've got all that. But I don't have that and the cost for my closing costs, right? So a buyer's closing costs are going to be about the appraisal, first year's homeowners insurance, inspections, some title work, and on down the line, right? And when they come to the closing table, the buyer comes with one amount, and that is the combination of their down payment and their closing costs. By the way, a buyer has to come up with their own down payment, all right? So that has got to be their money. Yes, there can be a gift from somebody, but if there is a gift from a family member, that family member signs a document that says there is no expectation of repayment. So in other words, we are giving this money. They're not paying us back. So the buyer has to have all of their own down payment. However, they can get someone else to pick up their closing costs. And those closing costs, let's say, might amount to $2,500 to $3,500. Let's just use those numbers, right? So what they're going to do is they're going to come to the equation. They're going to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I've got the job history, the credit, my down payment. And I know you have your own set of closing costs, and I have my own set of closing costs. But if we're going to make this happen, I need you to pick up your closing costs and pick up my closing costs. And the seller might say, that's fine. We're interested in getting this sold. We'll pick up your $2,500 to $3,500 in closing costs. But what we may do is go back and ask for a little bit more on the purchase price, because that is now costing us more on our closing cost side. All right? So therefore, we want a little bit more money for the house. So that can happen. And that is exactly what line 89 would be. Okay? So you might write in the margins $2,500 to $3,500. All right? The second one, this one is specific towards the buyer-broker compensation that the seller is willing to pay. So let's go back in time to the fact before a buyer's agent showed this property, they should have had a buyer agency agreement put together with the buyer. All right? And in that agreement was a time frame for how long the agreement is good for, as well as the amount of money that the buyer's agent is to receive upon successful completion of a transaction. All right? And so that is an agreement between the buyer and their agent, a promise there. And what the buyer is now saying to the seller is, we are asking for your assistance in compensating our agent. Okay? In the amount of whatever amount they put in there. Okay? Anybody have any questions on that? Go for it.
My question is regarding the concessions, provide an allowance of up to $2,500 to $3,500 for the purchase price. So you established that before you even know what buyers. Well, I'm on the purchase agreement. So at this point, you're asking them to provide it?
Yes.
It's not something that they've already put in the listing agreement saying that they would do or not do?
Nope. This is the buyer taking the initiative to ask
To
for
say,
it.
okay.
And you know where that came from is a conversation, most likely, between the buyer and the lender, or the buyer's agent and the buyer and the lender, that says, okay, here's the situation. We've got somebody good, ready to go. They've got down payment, but they are going to need some closing cost help. That's what you're going to hear from the lender. All right? By the way, what else are you going to get? So the lender is going to provide a pre-qualification letter. All right? A pre-qualification letter is a basic light run on the qualifications of this buyer, right? So it could be that the buyer calls up a local lender and says, hey, Quinn told me to give you a call. I need to get pre-approved for a home. And so, but I'm making an offer in 5 minutes and I need something. So they're going to say, give me your social, give me your birth date. I'm going to run some quick numbers. Here's a pre-qualification letter, all right? And so a pre-qualification letter can also come from places like Rocket or, Zillow loans, right? And that's a keyboard pre-qualification letter. Anybody ever been on one of those sites and say, I'll put in my critical information, and they're going to send back a form that says, congratulations, all right? There's a difference between a pre-qualification letter and a pre-approval letter. Pre-approval letter is the same thing, but oftentimes it's where a buyer has taken that next step and says, hey, by the way, here's a copy of my pay stub. and my bank statement showing the money I've got in the bank. And here's a copy of my last year's tax return. And so the lender can gather all of that information and they start really analyzing you as a borrower. And that is what they refer to as a pre-approved. So a pre-qualification is lighter in nature, a pre-approved is deeper in. Steve.
The buyer, the seller concessions, let's say for instance, we had that instance where the buyer needs some help with closing costs. Now, the seller comes back and says, we'll agree to that, but we want to increase the purchase price by $3,000 or whatever. Do they file an addendum, amendment, or do they, is that?
That would come,
counteroffer?
that would be in a counteroffer.
That'd be the counteroffer.
Yep.
So you have to write it back?
Yep.
Okay, I got you.
Yep. Okay.
I actually have one more question too. On the buyer broker compensation, is that included in closing costs or is that included in the loan? Like how does that?
It'll all be, so when we get to the closing table, there is a settlement statement. And it has both the buyer and seller side, usually, and debits and credits, 2 columns for each side, right? And so pluses and minuses all up and down that document, leading all down to one bottom number that the seller is going to receive and one bottom number that the buyer is going to receive. In there is going to be the broker compensation, whether the seller contributes to it, some of it, all of it, or none of it, and the buyer. But here's what you're going to want to know when it comes to this. If you have a buyer agency agreement with, say, somebody for 3.5%, all right? And so then you were to make an offer and your buyer was asking for 3.5% of the purchase price that the seller compensate to make this thing happen. And the seller said, no, I'm not going to pay 3.5, I'll pay 3, or I'll pay 2.5, right? You then, as that buyer's agent, say, hey, they're coming back with this. Among the terms is that they're not going to satisfy that entire obligation that we have for the compensation that I'm working for. Therefore, the seller will pick up some of it, and you will pick up the rest of it. I like to refer to that as kind of a cost share, right? Hey, good news. We got them to pay for part of it. You'll just have to pick up the other part of it. You do not need to, and I would resist in amending your buyer representation agreement solely based on what the seller is going to pay. All right? You may have already made an agreement with them for more. Don't feel you need to discount that just because the seller's not paying for it.
It should be in the pre-approval
And
letter as
does
well,
everybody understand that?
right? It should be in the pre-approval letter as well.
Okay.
That is your responsibility. If you don't have it, you can't assume that that's gonna.
All right, so the question was just asked, are there 2 commissions to be paid? All right, so let's go back in time and say when listing a seller, right? Oh, no. Let's see if I get this. Okay, back in the day, let's say there was the seller wanted to sell a property, and they called the agent out, and they came to an agreement on lots of things, how much to ask, what the condition of the property, all that sort of stuff, as well as the commission. So let's say they agreed to a 7% commission. So this is in the listing agreement. List agreement. And what that listing agent would do is they come back to the office and say, listen, I've got this listing agreement to sell this great house, and they're going to pay 7%. But I don't have a buyer for this area in this price range, whatever, right now. So I'm willing to split that, to offer half of that out to any the 500 or 600 other agents in the MLS. Say, hey, bring your buyer to the table because we're paying 3.5%. So this would be divided. And it would be 3.5% to the listing broker or listing agent, and the selling agent would get the other 3.5%. Okay? That's the way it always was back for a long time until last July when they formally bifurcated the commission. In other words, now when a listing agent is out talking to a seller, they're only talking about their half of it. All right? And when the buyer's agent or the selling agent is talking to their buyer, they're talking about what their worth is and what they're willing to work for. And that's that. So there are two commissions. One is on the listing side and one is on the buying side. But in this part of the equation right here, the buyer is saying, hey, they aren't saying this, but they're meaning it. Can we kind of go back to the old way it used to be where the seller picked up both sides of this? That's what I'm requesting right here. The seller may say, sure, I'll do that, but I want more money for it.
And it has to price out for that.
Yeah, all that good stuff. Everybody clear on how this works? All right. So,
I do have a question, real quick about the, never mind, I lost it.
you speak up if it comes to you. Okay. So closing date. So we picked August 4th as a closing date. Now, you're going to see this is where things diverge sometimes. You will see somebody put in a date here, and or you'll see or within say 5 days after loan approval, whichever is later. Okay? All right. So hear me out on this. Let's say, for instance, they get into the middle of all of this and the lender discovers, oh, you just declared bankruptcy 6 months ago, right? It's going to be 7 years or 6.5 years before you can actually get this bankruptcy cleared away and you can get formal loan approval. In theory, this contract is still alive, right? Because you said, we're going to close on this day or within 5 days after loan approval. Well, that's not going to be for 6.5 years. I suggest put a date down here that everybody can live with and stick with it. Otherwise, if you can't and you get up close to the closing and it's not going to happen, get an extension filed. That is the way I would suggest. All right. Now, some tips. When you are pegging so this would be one of those blanks I would have at the conference table where say, okay, when do you want to close? We need to be at least 30 to 45 days out. Oh, and by the way, between now and then is the 4th of July week, right? And half of America takes this week off that we're in right now because they already have Friday off, right? Or something like that. So just bear in mind that we got to buffer. We got to get a little bit extra in here. So I, as your agent, am asking you, look at your schedule. Are you going to be in town? Are you going to be on vacation? Are you going to, when does your job start? When are kids got to be in school? All the rest of this stuff. Take a look at your calendar. And then I would suggest for you as the agent, check your calendar, right? Oh, I happen to be out at a Cubs game on that day. I don't want to close on that day. So I'm going to be, let's choose the next day. Because at this stage of the game, it's just a date on the calendar. But once you put it in motion, that's the one everybody's going to stick with. So try to get it right from the beginning if you can. All right. The other.
Is there a length of time that, like you said, 30 to 45 days? Can you make it 60 days out or?
You could make it a longer closing. So let's say 30 to 45 days is the norm. But let's say, somebody's putting their house on the market in March and they got a kid graduating in May and they said, yeah, we're still going to have the graduation party here. So we can't close before then, but we want to get it on the market and try to capture the spring market while it's here. So we're going to have an extended closing. That's fine. You can do that. There is a term out there, though, a phrase that says time will kill all deals. So if you extend a closing and really get it out there, eventually something will happen and one of the parties said, yeah, can't make this happen for some reason. So rather than extend the closing for a very long time, maybe you get her closed in 30 to 45 days and agree to post-possession. Whereas the seller can stay in the house for a period of time after the closing, but the deal is done.
Pay rent so much per day.
They can pay rent. All right.
I have a quick question about selective sessions. I remember. So, as a listing agreement, or as a listing agent, you have a buyer that comes to the transaction and they bring their pre-approval letter. Are you allowed to see the amount that they are pre-approved for?
Yeah, so
Okay.
so the buyer will have a pre-approval letter, and on there are the terms if they're going FHA or VA or conventional, and then what the loan amount would be, and you can translate that. Some lenders will or won't translate that loan amount into a purchase price, you know, considering their down payment.
What I'm wondering is that, let's say, the house that you're listing is for sale at 130, they got approved for up to 150, but they're still asking for seller concessions. Does that happen?
Yep, that'll
They're
happen.
just kind of being greedy in that?
They're not being greedy. They may not have the cash on hand. They got approved to borrow more money, but they don't have the cash on hand to close it. All right, and that brings up a good point. So that conversation I just had, right, about, hey, I've got good job history, I got good credit, I got my down payment, I don't have that, and my closing costs, and so forth, right? I will have that same conversation with, say, a buyer, even though I know they've got money to put down, right? They've got 10% or 20% down, right? Because what is going to happen is, you know, they've got plenty to go down. And why artificially adjust the purchase price upward to cover the closing costs, right? If you don't need to, which would you rather have? But I will still explain to a buyer and says, listen, here is one thing that is a possibility for you. And I go through that whole explanation of what are buyers' closing costs and sellers' closing costs, and then how they adjust for it on the purchase price. But the thing is, you've got the money, right? So would you rather preserve that money and not have to come to the table with it and pay more for the house, or are you more interested in getting the house for the best price you can? And most of them, if they've got money to put down, say, yeah, I want to get it for the best price I can. Therefore, I would not ask for closing cost assistance because they're going to just bump the price on you. And why do I say that to people that I know are in the clear? Because what's going to happen is they are going to write this offer and get it under contract, and they're going to go back to work, and they're going to talk to a coworker, and the coworker is going to say, well, didn't you ask for closing costs? Yeah, we got the seller pay all kinds of closing costs for it. What they fail to say is, and we ended up paying more for the house because we didn't have the money to put down. So I am jumping ahead of that conversation and say, here's why you are not going to ask for closing costs unless you want to.
Or if there's multiple offers, they'll take the one that doesn't have any concessions.
That could be. I'm sorry, Steve.
Keep in mind that everybody's situation is different.
It is different, but I'm just making sure that if they hear from a coworker, why didn't you ask the seller to pay for closing costs? They already heard it from me. Okay, so now, okay, we just talked about closing dates. And if you are going to go past the date that you talked about, get an extension. All right, so line 99, fee. The settlement or closing fee incurred by the settlement, charged by the closing agent. So in other words, the title company charges a closing fee, all right? And in this, what's customary in our area, and you'll hear me use that phrase or term a bit, what's customary, right, is that we usually see that box checked equally. No big deal with that. However, I will tell you from experience and getting an angry phone call from a buyer that says, yeah, they told me that the closing costs, or what he heard was closing costs, were going to be shared equally, not the $450 closing fee. This is a $450 closing fee that gets split equally between the buyer and seller, so $225 on each side. That's not what he heard. He heard closing costs, and he had closing costs in the thousands of dollars. And this buyer's agent had to cough up some money because they did not take the time to explain the difference between a closing fee and closing costs. Okay, and that was one of those that The contract was sent to them with little to no explanation and said, look it over and sign it when you're ready. All right. Contingency. So most of the transactions, there's going to be this box, is not contingent upon the closing of another transaction. All right, so that's where you're going to see most of them. The second box is contingent upon the closing of a pending transaction. That's the key part right there, of a buyer's property located at this address by this date. Okay, so in order for us to close on this one, I've got to close on mine. All right, so that happens. It's not unusual. However, a good listing agent will start to ask questions then, right? And one of the things is they're going to say, all right, how far along are you in this sale? Have you passed the inspection process? Have you passed the appraisal section? You know, how far into that transaction are you? Did you just get started, or are you through a lot of stuff? Because that would give me some comfort knowing you're a little further along. I would also ask, and again, this goes back to the fact that this transaction is subject to that one closing, right? I'm going to say, is that buyer pre-approved? Because if they can't close, we can't close. Are they pre-approved? I would say also, is that transaction subject to another one down upstream from that? Remember, so dominoes falling. How many dominoes are in this equation? I need to know that, because you might get surprised by, oh yeah, there's two more ahead of this. And if any one of them doesn't fall, this one doesn't fall. All right? So those are all legit questions you can ask. Now, you can ask, now you got to find your voice in asking it politely and have a good reason why. But if I was on the listing side, I might ask the buyer's agent, can I see a copy of that contract? All right? So again, it's a trust but verify, but I will be able to glean a lot. If you want to redact the purchase price, if you want to mark out who the buyer of that property is, I don't care. I want to see that that one is not subject to another closing. I want to see what kind of loan they're getting. All back to the point of, if that one doesn't close, ours doesn't close. And that is me doing a little bit of due diligence on behalf of my client.
What if you have a client that wants to list their house, but they also haven't found a house to buy? It just kind of feels like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
It seems kind of.
That is a really, really tough situation to be in. So here's the kind of the Reader's Digest conversation I have with those people is we can do one of two things. Well, one is, in Ninja they talk about waving the magic wand, right? If we wave the magic wand, what would a perfect scenario be? A perfect scenario would be we put your house up on the market for sale, and we get somebody interested. And by the way, while it's for sale, we're kind of keeping our eye on the market, maybe going and seeing a house or two, so that we are up to speed on what the inventory looks like. So, and then we get an offer put together on your house, right? And we know we then have 30 to 45 days to close on it. So the minute we get an offer put together on your house, we are out there looking at anything available, and you find one that you like. And so we put together an offer on that, subject to a closing, and now we're into two contracts, right? The sale of your house and the purchase of another house. And if we arrange it right, we'll try to close these things on the same day, back to back. If it's all in the same area, we'll do it at the same title company, so the money never leaves the title company. Your proceeds are going to become your down payment and all that good stuff. And what would be even better is if we could negotiate possession after closing on the house you're selling. Not a lot, maybe 5, 7, 10 days, right? But if we could, because we're closing these back to back, maybe the house you're buying, we're going to get possession at closing, all right? So we close them back to back, but you stay in your house, yet you have possession of the new one. And now you're making one move from that house to this house, and then you turn over possession to the buyer of your house. That is, if we could wave a magic wand, that would be a perfect scenario. And it can happen, but there's a lot of what ifs. What if you can't find that dream house, that next house you really want to be in, and you don't want to settle for something? This is where the thing is. You've got to then have what I refer to as a plan B. What is your plan B? Is it moving in with family? Is it getting a short-term rental? Is it doing something? And be prepared to move twice. We are now moving from that house to a storage unit. And then you're going to go out and find the next house and move from the storage unit into that. So way less convenient, but it is a possibility. And for some people, they need to get the first piece of the puzzle put to bed, such as the sale of the house and the money out of it, before they can move on with the next one. But always make sure people aren't going to find themselves homeless. They got to have that plan B. So there's different options to it. There's that one ideal way that I just described, but then there's these other options where there's short-term rental, staying with family. Now, it could be what you're referring to too is maybe a reverse contingency. So rather than contingent upon the pending transaction, the buyer selling their home, maybe you're thinking, yeah, we'll accept an offer subject to us going out and finding a home, right? That would be something in reverse. I saw a little bit of that in that last heated market that we just got through, right? But I'm here to tell you, as a buyer's agent, that makes me feel real uncomfortable because I don't know how picky you're going to be. I don't know what your price range is going to be. What if I go committing to buying your house and you can't find that next one? I'm out. And I don't have that time and energy to work on a house that I'm not going to hopefully end up with. So that's a little bit harder of a sell. Any questions on that? And that's a great question because these are real conversations you will be having with sellers as you are advising them on how to do things. All right? Okay. So that's their call. Some people are super comfortable with making 2 moves and staying with family or getting a short-term rental. They're like, yeah, that sounds good to me. Other people are like, yeah, I can't make that happen. All right. Now, these other 2, we'll talk about these in a little bit, but I'll give you the short version. Is contingent upon the acceptance of a purchase agreement. So these 2 are if somebody has a house to sell and it's not even on the market yet. Or maybe it's not under contract. So is contingent upon the keys here you can underline or highlight. First right contingency or limited purchase contingency. Those are the key parts of that. The first one, they both come with addendums. The first one says, hey, we'll put this deal together. And then if you happen to get another offer from somebody else after we've come to terms, I've got what they refer to as a first right. Basically, once you get another acceptable offer, you're going to turn back towards me, buyer number 1, and say, you got 48 hours to either step up and make this sale happen without the contingency or to step aside. Okay? That's the first option with the first right. You've got so many hours or days to step up and make it happen or get out of the way. The other one, this limited purchase contingency, same scenario where we put together an offer, an agreement, and buyer number 2 comes in and makes an acceptable offer. But in this case, as the seller, I turn from accepting an offer with buyer number 2 back to buyer number 1 and say, listen, you don't have 48 or 72 hours. Our deal is just off. I refer to this one as the sudden death contingency. Basically, all the seller has to say is, we put our agreement together, but now I got another offer. This one is off. That's only under the second one. All right? And the key difference between those 2, in both cases, they are somebody that wants to sell a house before they commit to moving forward to buying a house. And the first one gives them time to do something to move forward. The second one gives them no time to do something forward. And the key element in all of that is, does the buyer have the ability to move forward with the purchase of the second house without selling the first house or not? Because if the answer is no, there's no point in putting that one together. Because all they're going to do is sit around for 48 hours and look at the house they want, go bye-bye, because there's not a thing they can do about it. So you have to get that piece of information up front. Says, I know you don't want to move forward with the purchase without selling your house, but could you if you were pressed on it? And someone will say, yeah, we would still move forward, but like, no, can't do it. So therefore, they need the sudden death one. All right?
Wait, I'm sorry, so it's people that need to send that one, or people who can put a deal together?
No, that would be the first right, because then they have 48 hours to decide, hey, you can do this if you want. Do you want? Whereas the sudden death is like, yeah, you have no choice. Does that make sense? And I'll go show you those forms here in just a minute. All right. Okay, moving fun. All right, I promise the rest of these forms are going to start moving faster. I'm just trying to get some concepts down here, the base agreement. Okay, so good funds just means if you are bringing, as a buyer, $10,000 to the table, according to Indiana code, it's got to be wired in. Used to be that any amount a bank check would satisfy, a cashier's check, not a money order, but a bank check. But around the time of the recession, those rules changed, and a buyer has to have their money wired in if it's over $10,000. And speaking of wiring, there is wire fraud going on out there. It is real. Doesn't happen all the time, but it is real. And you, the buyer, will never receive wiring instructions from me. I do not pass along wiring instructions. Too much liability in it. I am going to put you in contact with the title company. You're going to get their wiring instructions. You're going to get that worked out, and that's who you're going to send it to. All right? And I would not trust wiring instructions by way of email. We had an instance, it involved me once, where I had a buyer that was going to be purchasing on this property, and they got their email hacked, all right? And those things still happen today. And what happened was the bad guys sat there and just sat and waited. They realized she was going through a purchase of something and just waited and waited, and saw all the communications we had surrounding this sale. When we got up close to the closing and the buyer was going to be wiring in their earnest money, the bad guy sent in new wiring instructions. Hey, for tomorrow's, we have a correction to the wiring instructions. This is where you need to send it. And the buyer then went down to First Source Bank and turned in those wiring instructions. And fortunately, the person at First Source Bank, by the way, a local lender and a local title company, said, yeah, that's not usually where we send our wiring for Meridian Title. And picked up the phone and called Meridian and said, did you change your wiring instructions? And they said no. And so that's where it stopped. But I'm telling you, that buyer was rattled because it was a lot of money. And you know, a wire is almost like cash, right? Whereas a check has to have time to clear. There's this short period of time that this thing passes through the Federal Reserve that they can pull it back if possible, but it's a very short amount of time. And once it's gone, it bounces to another account and it is out of here. So you will never get wiring instructions from me. All right, possession. Most of the time, we close on it, and buyer will receive keys at closing. That is the way most of them happen. However, I just described to you an instance where we might negotiate possession after closing. All right, so if that's the case, you would check, or within, say, 10 days, beginning the day after closing by 5 p.m. or something like that. And then this first one right here, line 125, if there is possession after closing, remember, once a buyer closes on a property and the deed is signed and the money's been delivered and all that, they now own the property. They're paying for the property. And so what will happen sometimes is if there's agreed upon possession after closing for a period of time, there gets to be a per diem that's applied to that, right? So what is that? It would be, say, their monthly payment divided by 30, and that's the daily rate that we'll charge here. All right? So this is what I refer to as the friendly rent back amount right here. This might be $45 a day or $65 a day, just depending. And then this second one on line 27, this is the I need you out of the house amount. And that's why they have it highlighted as liquidated damages. This is my moving truck is showing up and they're on the clock and I need you out by this time. Now, in recent years, when buyers have been trying to pull out any kind of trick to get a seller to agree to their offer, we haven't seen as many instances where the buyer is going to charge a per diem for a short period of time. If it's a long period of time, it's a different story. But if it's a short period of time, they like, hey, just have those few days on us if you accept our offer. But then you always have that liquidated damages part that really hikes it up, says, yeah, this amount of money per day says I need you out. Maintenance of property, so the seller will maintain the property in its current condition, all right, and deliver it to the buyer at closing, and that includes keeping the utilities on, and the seller shall remove all debris and personal property, not including sales. So they've got to have it cleaned out and ready to go by the time closing takes place. And that, where we find more problems with that is when the seller decided to leave all the paint cans and all that stuff that goes along with the house in the basement, right? Even though it's been 30 years since they painted, half the cans are dried up, it doesn't matter. The buyer's going to be painting all that. So if you see piles of cans like that, address them with the seller and say, all right, how fresh is this? Is this still good? Is it not? We will ask the buyer if they want it. If the buyer says no, you got to get all this stuff out.
I have a question about the days of the seller pays the buyer. So line 125 and 127, do you only fill out one or the other, or?
No, you would probably fill out both if there is possession after closing. I have chosen to dash it out because we're not going to charge in, because in this instance, we're getting it at closing.
Okay, so if we weren't gonna get it at closing, say we're gonna get it 15 days after closing.
Okay, so it'd be 15 here.
Okay, and then will they still pay for those 15 days?
It's negotiable.
For like 125? Okay, and then the 127, that line doesn't start until after those 15 days?
That's right. And the 15 days doesn't start until closing happens. So if closing is delayed, the start of the 15 days is delayed.
Okay.
All right? So that's where I was saying, though, is the buyer has a choice if they want to charge them for that 15 days or not charge them for the 15 days. Okay? All right. Casualty loss, so if something real big happens to this property, that causes damage, the buyer would have an option. They may either terminate this agreement with return of the earnest money, or they could elect to close the transaction, in which case they have the right to any insurance proceeds that can happen. All right. Utilities. Seller will keep the utilities on through the day of possession. Sometimes that's the day of closing, sometimes it's after, but it's always going to be in their name until they're ready to turn it over. Home heating fuel. Most of the time in St. Joseph County, we don't have that many properties on LP anymore. You guys in Elkhart probably do in the more rural areas, so just be aware of that. Is the remaining amount in the tank going to be included with the sale, or is it going to be purchased at the going rate, whatever that is? Leased property, again, so if you're selling a rental, exactly, then you've got to fill this stuff in. You should be provided with the lease. You should be provided with all that kind of information within so many days. Okay, if anybody has questions or wants to speak up, go for it. All right, survey. Does the buyer want a survey or not? All right. And these are a number of these choices, right? There's some choices that are pretty standard and other choices that I am not going to make a call on until I talk to the buyer. So survey being one of them. So you have a choice. You can get a survey location report, whereas the surveyor goes out, they take some measurements, they go back to their office and they create a drawing showing the improvements. Anything on the land is an improvement, a house, a garage, a shed, a fence. And it ought to show general locations on it on a survey location report. A boundary survey is the same thing. They go out, they take their measurements, they go back to their office and create a drawing, but in addition to that, they will flag the corners so you visually can see where things are. Or you can waive it altogether, all right? So here's a couple things on this surveys. One, don't stand out in the backyard and then your buyer will turn to you and say, is that where the property lines, or where do you think the property lines? Oh, well, the fence goes around here, so I'm pretty much thinking that's the property line. So do not make some kind of statement that says this is where the property lines are. You are not a surveyor, and you cannot always tell visually. Just because somebody put a fence up or somebody happens to be mowing in a particular line, don't make those assumptions.
So what's the difference between a surveyor location report and a boundary survey?
The flags, the stakes.
See what the lines are.
So you
So if
visually,
got a fence, and you're just trying to make sure that the fence or whatever improvement garage is on the property, you do not have to get a boundary survey. If you get that report, it'll tell you if those are on the property.
yes, it will tell you. However, there will be a qualifier on it that says the exact extent to what is going on here won't be known unless we do a boundary survey. Yep. Stake and boundary are the same thing. Yep. All right, so where corner markers of the property are set prior to closing.
Do you encourage your buyers
So,
surveys?
so they're great question. So I would say one of the things I do is now, I'm not trying to draw a conclusion to anything for sure, but I will oftentimes go back here, right? And come on.
So you're under owner's client name or owner name,
Oh,
you can put it on.
Is that Macog, is that just for Elkhart and St. Joseph, or?
yeah. Michiana Area Council of Governments or something like that. I think I probably. So I go here, and then it takes me here, and then I zoom in there. Come on.
Oh, are you potentially checking to see if one has already been done, filed?
That I can't find that. That may be deeper in the, but if I go here, right, and I mess around with these filters a little bit, right? So I say I want the aerial. Take this off, right? I could see a lot more here, right? Now, if somebody's buying this house right here and they said, hey, should we get a survey? I could say, well, maybe. Let's take a look. So it looks like the house is squarely on the land, on the lot. Now, bear in mind, this is taken from outer space, and somebody's drawn an overlay of these property lines. So none of it's exact, by the way. So just be aware of that. I would say that the house is clearly based on this, but look at this fence that goes over here, right? Is this possibly an encroachment on the other property, on the other person's property? I don't know. A survey would determine that.
I will say that the fence on the opposite side of the house is an encroachment onto the neighbor's property.
This,
Yeah, we had to have an easement agreed upon for that, but yeah, I mean, so a survey would pick that up.
a survey may pick that up.
Wondering.
Another one is we had somebody out not far from you guys, out by where the headwaters of the Kankakee River are, out there between by North Liberty and I forget what road it was on. But anyways, 100 acres for sale, all right? And so institutional buyer came in and purchased this, somebody with venture capital and, one of those types that came in and they said, oh, we're buying 100 acres, let's get a survey. And it had been in the family for many, many years. Survey comes back, says, yeah, it's not 100 acres, it's 95, right? And so people buy acreage based on price per acre. And so now we're paying this set amount of money, not for 100 acres, but for 95 acres. The deal still went through, they still made it happen. But that was a good example. So if you're selling land or property, you may want to get a survey. Another might be if you're on water, all right? So for instance, if you get onto these lakes up in Michigan, right? And most of them are maybe 50 feet wide, maybe 60 or 75, that starts to get to be a big lot right there. They usually don't have that much frontage. And the strange thing about people that live on lakes is most of them have money, right? And a lot of them are used to getting their way. And so you have all these people with money and used to getting their way 50 feet apart from each other, right? And so every inch, every foot on waterfront means something to people, all right? And so that would be a good way. We had an instance where somebody bought a property, and it was not on the lake. It was across the street from the lake. But it was said, with this property comes deeded access down to the lake, right? And so the buyer picks it up, buys it, closes it, and first thing they do is start trucking down the easement with their canoe or something. The neighbor next to it says, what are you doing? He's like, well, I have access rights or I have deeded rights or something along here. And that guy said, no, you don't. Turned into this big mess in a lawsuit because the buyer said, I would have never bought this property had I not had that access that I was told. A survey would have shown that. So, under all is the land. Houses get put up, houses come and go, right? Same with fences and everything else. If you want to know what you are buying in terms of land, get a survey. And when I put up a privacy fence, not that long ago, I did a stake survey because I wanted to get that right there on the line. So, and if your client wants to put up a fence, God bless them, you can get a survey if you want. The question for today is, do you want the sale subject to the survey results? You can get a survey any day, any time, and put up your fence. Do you want this sale to be part of it? Here's an example of what happened one time. So, survey would have shown that for sure. Surveys are expensive though. That mortgage survey is like $450 at least, maybe $500. That's without the stakes. The stake survey is going to start you off around $2,000 or so. So it's nothing to sneeze at. But
And they already have a survey, it's semi-reliable, but maybe not 100% either.
yeah,
If they have an existing survey from 20 years ago,
A lot can change during that 20 years, yeah.
They're also like a month, 2 months out sometimes.
yes, so they are a ways out. And yes, you do have old surveys. Let me see here if I still have access here. So, a couple things. And again, we're all over the place. I'll get you out of here on time today, but I might keep talking a little bit through lunch. So, a couple things. Betty Jean just made a very good point. That sometimes there's an old survey, right? And we had a surveyor come in and address the group during a sales meeting one time. He says, survey from years ago, things change. So be careful about using those old surveys. So what I do is on a listing that I might have, I uploaded the old survey. But you'll notice here, I called it the previous survey. Okay? Not only did I do that, because I think it's important information. I want the buyer to know what the survey does say. But if I go in here and I pull it up, this is the old survey, but I put this in. Previous survey provided for reference only and information contained therein is not guaranteed. Buyers should perform their own survey if desired. I'm giving you the information so you can see what's going to happen, but I'm not here to guarantee what's going on because somebody could have moved a fence, somebody could have done something. And by the way, this particular survey shows a vacated alley right in here, right? So you do find, and this happens to sit on two parcels, parcel 1 and parcel 2. So don't blow off the survey. I'm not saying it has to be in every transaction. There used to be a day when it did have to be that mortgage survey. Anybody in title and lending from years and years ago remembers surveys used to have to, now they do what they refer to as insure over, right? So anyways.
And it makes it contingency, if they do check this box, we're gonna get a boundary survey, does that make it a contingency?
Yes, oh yeah.
How often do you recommend the seller to do that when you get in the listing, if they don't have one?
The seller?
When do you make a recommendation to them, or you just, oh, I don't wanna pay for it?
Yeah, when it comes to
Bring
a,
that up right away, or just let it go?
yeah, when it comes to a seller, I usually don't recommend the seller pay for a bound or any kind of survey. Say if the buyer wants one, they can pay for it. But if the seller's telling me, yeah, I've got 100 acres out there, I'm gonna be like, well, I need something to show to them that this is legit. I don't know. So if I am giving a recommendation to somebody about a survey, it's usually to the buyer.
So according to this survey, it looks like they own that vacant alley.
Yeah, they abandoned it. The city abandoned it, and then these people took it over. I want to show you a different one, though. This is always a great one, where you are putting together a sale. All right, so I'm selling a property over on Jefferson. Nice house. And my sign is in the yard. And then eventually, there's a sale pending sign going on in the yard, too. All right, everything's moving along. And then, as happens, I get contacted from the neighbor. And the neighbor says, hey, Quinn, I know you're selling that property, but I wanted to let you know that your client's fence is a foot over on my property, right?
Now you're in the middle.
Yeah, the fence has been there for how long? And you didn't have the backbone to go talk to your neighbor about it, but of course you have to get me involved, right? And he says, by the way, let me send you the survey that I got. And so what happened was, I have the house on 16, lot 16. He's got the house on 15. He came in after the fact, right? These people owned theirs before he came in. So it was the neighbor that got the survey done. And this is the way a survey will read, right? So when he got it, he said a 1-inch iron pipe. So there's a stake at that corner. As much as it is buried, you know, you use a metal detector. Sometimes you can find those things. Doesn't mean they're always accurate, but there's one there. And they found an iron pipe there too, all right? They also saw a rebar. So what a stake usually is a piece of rebar, if you know what that looks like, with a cap on it that usually has the surveyor's information on it. So this said rebar from Lang Feeney and Associates, right there. And then this is rebar with Lang Feeney on it as well. But this is showing, so my client took down their fence and they put a new fence up. And they are saying that they thought they were putting it in the right spot, but they got it 2 feet over, 2.4 feet over onto this neighbor's property. So you see that and you say, all right, that's a problem, but it's curable. It's a fence and it's only 2 feet in one spot and it goes down to nothing halfway up. You know, let's see what we can do to work this out. All right, so there's a couple different options that you can go here, right? One is Jess alluded to just a little bit ago in that property that was up on the screen. And what was that? An easement or there's also what referred to in full-on easement grants perpetual granting. But what they may do, and the title company can do this, is what they refer to as a license to encroach. License to encroach says, hey, we will all admit that you put the fence up on my side of the property, and that's okay. We get along. We'll allow that to happen. But under the circumstances that the fence remain in good condition, and should something ever happen to the fence, you agree to put it back on the proper side of the line. Okay? That's two neighbors that get along. This guy's an attorney. And he says, yeah, I'm not granting any kind of license to encroach. And we had to move the fence.
Hold on a second. So if they did do a license, would that only apply to this owner? Like if then they sold, it wouldn't apply to the next owner?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to assume that once they agree to it, that it's agreed to, but it's not, I don't know. The title company puts it together. It's called license to encroach. It's two parties that agree.
It could say it ends there, or it could say to future buyers,
Yeah.
right? Or however that contract
Something.
reads.
Essentially, what we did was we connected our fence on one side to our neighbor's fence, but it didn't cross over her survey line. But what we did was we agreed with her, we created an easement saying, we will take care of the land on this side, because we realize you can't get to it now if you let us put our fence up during the duration of our times here.
That's it.
And so it probably would not carry forward after the fact, or if she wants to replace her fence, at that point, we'll have to determine what we do with ours, if she decides she wants her full land back, but that helps us right now. So that way, nobody can kind of complain.
Yeah. So, but that's what surveys do. So don't poo-poo surveys. All right. Doesn't mean you have to, every one of them's got to have it, but all right. So moving forward. Surveys, flood area. All right. A buyer may or may not terminate this agreement if it's determined that it requires flood insurance. Okay? Flood insurance may be required if you are in a designated flood area, but it's only required if you're getting a loan. If you are paying cash for a property and you're in a flood area, you don't have to get flood insurance. But if the bank says you're in a flood area, because we pulled what they refer to as a flood certificate, then you may or may not. So most of the time, agents are saying, yeah, the buyer may terminate if it's determined to be in a flood area because flood insurance gets very expensive. All right. Building use limitations. So are you just buying this for you, or you and your family to live in, or are you using this for other purposes like rental, commercial, anything like that? So if most of the time people are just using it as a single family owner occupied home, but don't check that box if you're working with an investor, because it's not owner occupied. Homeowners insurance. So this right here, this used to be a throwaway paragraph. I'll just say that. What I mean by that was homeowners insurance used to amount to such a small fractional part of somebody's monthly payment, right? Okay, I got to get homeowners. Not anymore. Homeowner insurance rates are really going up there, right? So you need to get, your client needs to go in within so many days to get a favorable written commitment. That's the key word here for homeowners insurance. Okay? And if you are selling a property that you think might be in a flood area or something that really is going to have a property insurance cost that's going to impact this property, get that figured out. And by the way, these are all contingencies. So if they get an unfavorable written commitment for homeowner insurance, they could pull the plug.
Oh, and if the buyer, let's say, says, oh, my lender says I need to get the HOI, and you say, HOI, that's what homeowners insurance is, HOI.
Yeah. And they've got to be okay with that commitment, that amount, as part of their overall payment. So, all right, so highlight that, favorable written commitment. All right, environmental contaminants. So I'm not an expert on environmental issues, and neither are you. So if something of environmental nature comes up, we are going to call in the experts on that, okay? All right, now when I get to, I know in my mind, when I'm getting to survey is a survey, but it's kind of a quasi-inspection of the property. And then, we're also talking about environmental contaminants. I, in my mind, know I am getting to the inspection portion of the contract. All right? All right, so let's go here. So there's three choices here. Buyer, most of the time that I am working with people, the buyer is getting an inspection. Okay? and they have the right to inspect anything in the house. As a matter of fact, in the purchase agreement, we do not spell out exactly what the buyer is going to get inspected, right? They can have anything under the sun that they want inspected. They can have heating, cooling, they can have the roof, they can have a whole house, they can have anything they want, right? So here's the whole list of things that they can have inspected. Roof, wall, ceiling, septic, well, all the rest of that. What we do spell out here in the contract is how many days that they've got to do the work. I've got in 20 days. You may get an agent that pushes back and say, we need you to do those inspections faster than that. We want to know. By the way, whenever you're talking days in the contract, these are always calendar days, all right? The whole agreement and subsequent agreements are based on calendar days. If anyone encourages you to insert business days, I discourage that. I see that once in a while. Keep it consistent. Keep it all calendar days, because if you put in business days one place, did you mean business days the other place? And the whole market, local market, customarily is working off of calendar days, and you're inserting business days. And what's a business? Is Black Friday a business day? I don't know. Is Juneteenth a business day? All right? So you see my point. So keep it calendar days and you'll be all right. By the way, if I'm putting together an offer, you know, say last Friday, and I put in 20 days and the other agent pushes back, say no, 10 days, and then I say, okay, well, I'm getting this together on a Friday, or even on a Thursday. Tomorrow's Friday, day one, so that starts the clock. But then I'm burning the whole weekend, so now I've burnt 3 days of my agreed upon days, and then I know next week is the 4th of July week, and half America takes the whole week off, and then I've got a 3-day weekend. Like, keep in mind how many, if you've got a holiday coming up, or the time and the week you're putting this thing together, because you may be shortchanging yourself some days if you're not careful. And it may be up to you to explain that to the other agent. Say, hey, I hear it. I hear what you're saying. You want us to get these done faster. I want them done as fast as possible too. However, I want to bring to your attention, next week is the 4th of July week, and you know how that goes, and this sort of stuff. So we'll do our best, but I don't want to shortchange ourselves. If you run out of days, you just have to get an extension on that. I'd rather not have to ask for an extension, but if you're going to push me to a lower amount, just be open to the fact that I may have to. And by the way, especially if there's a septic involved. Septics, for some reason, take a little bit longer because they go make an inquiry with the county for the past records before they go out and dig. So some things need a little bit more.
Do you think 20 days is a pretty average?
I think if there's a septic inspection, but I submitted an offer not long ago with that 20-day, and they said, we'd like to see that down to 12, and they said, rightfully so, because there's not inspection for the septic. Do you think you can do that? I said, yeah, I think we can make that happen.
And you've always had that success with those types of shorter time periods with your inspectors?
Yes,
For the most
but
part.
for the most part. But like, for instance, today, this is a busy, not only is it a holiday week, it's a busy time of year. There's a lot of appraisers and inspectors out there doing their thing, and they can't just hop to it. So people have to be reasonable with the time, but they also want to know that you're moving forward with stuff. So there's two sides to that conversation. All right, so let's go back here, though, quickly. All right, so other options for inspections. One is a complete waiving of inspections. I would highly discourage that unless somebody is really adamant they are going to waive inspections. I never want it to come back on me that you waived inspections and there was stuff that came up and you're unhappy with the end result because of it. Okay, so, but if somebody waives inspections, they are waiving inspections. They are not getting under contract saying we're waiving inspections and then suddenly, oh, we just want to know for our own sake what's going on, because then something's going to come up and they're going to want to hesitate on purchasing it because of it, what they was discovered. If you are waiving inspections, you're waiving inspections. And if it were me, and somebody was waiving inspections, two more things are going to happen. One, I'm going to not only check that box, I'm going to have them initial out here somewhere, either digitally or in person. And then we actually have another form that furthermore states you are waiving inspections. This needs to be driven home. That does not bypass, though, the FHA or lender required portion of that appraisal. Remember that those check boxes that they've got, the condition check boxes, you can't waive that off. The other is property to be sold as is, and you'll see right there, see attached addendum. I would highlight that. All right? I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment as I explain more about inspections. All right, so we've got 20 days, and we have all these options for inspections. All right?
Where was the spot you wanted us to highlight?
See attached addendum.
Oh,
Okay. All right. Now, sometimes you will see in a offer, and it's legit. I don't do it, but so I just agree upon all these days right here to get the inspections done. There's a second slot, a second field that sometimes you'll see a 5 in here. So you might, in the margin, say 5 question mark or something like that. And what this is, hey, if something comes up in the initial inspections, we've got 5 additional days to get that checked out. All right, so this is in addition to the initial. So I take the stance, hey, let's just agree to one number up front and we'll get it done. But some people say, okay, well, 15 days at the top one and 5 days at the second one to check it out more if necessary. So you'll see that. All right, and then, so there needs to be then a response. So a couple things to bear in mind here. One is, who gets a copy of the inspection, all right? As is, and same with who gets a copy of the appraisal by that. So I bring this up for a couple reasons. One is if you are working with the seller is eager to know what does the house appraise for, right? You know, we thought about pricing it here, but we thought about pricing it there, and maybe we pushed the envelope, maybe we undersold it. I want to know what the appraiser is going to say.
I don't have to tell them.
You,
It was fine.
you, the seller, do not get a copy of the appraisal. All right?
I don't have to tell them.
And they don't have to tell them. So usually what I am looking for on the listing site is what, I'll ask, what can you tell me about the appraisal? And somebody on the other side might say, it appraised, there's no conditions, we're all set. Yep.
No number.
Yep. Now, and the same goes true for the inspections. So you will have an inspection take place in the morning and the seller's on the phone to you in the afternoon and says, well, how did it go? I don't know. I don't get the copy of the inspection. The buyer orders the inspection and they get a copy of it. In both cases, whether it be the inspection results or the appraisal, the only time we on the listing site are going to see it is if there's something to be done on it, if there's an issue. So if it doesn't appraise, I want to see that appraisal. Don't tell me it didn't appraise and not share the appraisal with me, right? You got to show me. Same with the inspection results. If you got some issues that came back on the inspection, I got to see those if you want us to address them, all right?
Can I?
Yeah.
So if you're working with a buyer and they share, hey, you did a good deal. You got our house for 200. And guess what? What? It came in at 220. Sweet. And then when you're closing, you say, it's nice to sit here with you and you get 20 grand instant equity. Did a good job.
Yeah.
Do a good job.
Yeah.
That's how you're working.
That is. But be careful. I don't know that I would pass that information down line.
No. I'm just saying, you gotta, if you're representing the buyer and they are willing to share it with you.
Yeah.
At the table, your instant equity is worth it. Give me a good survey.
Okay. Now, one thing I definitely want to, and I want you to highlight, line 237. Once the inspection results come back, the buyer cannot just walk away from the sale. So oftentimes a buyer will attend the home inspection, right? That's a good thing. And so they walk around, they see what the issues are, that sort of stuff. But if they don't like what's gone on in that home inspection and they're walking out the door looking at each other saying, yeah, we don't want this house anymore, we're out of here, right? Well, they can do that, but there's a high likelihood they'll just lose their earnest money, all right? The buyer has to give, if a defect is found, the buyer has to give the seller the opportunity to remedy the defect. Okay? So they got to give them a chance to correct what's going on. If the seller says okay, then everybody's moving forward. If the seller says no, you know, I'm not going to, you list a thing of 10 things that you want us to attend to, and we're not willing to do those, right? So then the buyer says, okay, we'll still move forward, and I now acknowledge those and agree I'll take care of those things at my expense after closing, and we'll all move forward. Or no, if you're not willing or able to correct these things, then I'm not willing to move forward with the sale and deal off, and that is a condition of the contract. I will receive my earnest money back. All right? What usually happens is the buyer asks for 10 things. The seller says, hey, I'll take care of the odd numbered ones, and you take care of the even number ones, and we'll work this thing out. Okay? So that's usually what happens. Now, a defect, it's defined in here. It's a little bit, I think it's the next, yeah. It's got to have significant impact to the health and safety of the property, or that if not corrected would have an adverse effect on the value of the property. All right?
And could you make an amendment to the price if they're not willing to?
Just depends. Sometimes there can be a credit involved. The credit can be involved if it's a cash sale. Fine. Get a repair credit or change the purchase price. But if there is a lender involved, sometimes if they haven't already asked for closing costs and they just want a credit for something, we say, okay, these repairs, we have estimates, and they're going to amount to $2,000. So rather than lenders will not agree to seeing a seller credit for repairs on the settlement statement, but it can be noted as a closing cost credit.
See, and the lender doesn't have to see the inspection report. They'll see the appraisal, but now if you're bringing them, if an underwriter sees additional information, then they can squash it, so you don't really want to sit.
Yeah,
have that uploaded.
Yep, so
They gotta discover and say, okay, I see the appraisal, this needs to be fixed, if it's an underwriting condition. But don't give them more to put their magnifying glass on.
yep.
If it's like a $20,000 fix,
Mhm.
you can't move forward with the deal by just saying $20,000 of seller.
Not in seller concessions. If they wanted to adjust the price downward by $20,000, that could work. You got to contend with the appraisal that's been done, and the lender may be asking, why are we adjusting by $20,000? It'll throw up questions about what's going on. Not to mention, the least of which is the buyer is accepting the house needing $20,000 worth of some repair that I'm like, yeah, you're going to acknowledge that you're accepting this and that we're not liable if it turns into $30,000 or $40,000, right? Okay, and so that's that. Defects defined. Previously disclosed defects are not to be renegotiated. All right, now here's something though that you ought to be having, a conversation you should be having with any buyer that says, listen, we've been out looking at houses and it's all been good, and now once we get into this contract, you got to know that so far it has cost you nothing to look at houses, all right? It's just cost us our time. But now that we're getting into this contract, you are going to start spending real money on this sale. And like I said, 90% of them make it to the closing table, but there's 10% that don't. And once we get into these inspections, you will be spending money. So a whole house inspection may run $400 or $500. Septic inspection, $300 if there is one, and then radon, termite, all the rest of that. So you might be in for inspections, if you go all in, maybe $600 or $700. And by the way, you most likely have already ordered the appraisal to be done, and that's going to be another $450, right? So you might be in for $1,000. And if this thing doesn't close, you may have a salty buyer on your side of the equation that says, hey, I just threw $1,000 at this sale for a house I didn't end up with, right? So you gotta anticipate that as being a slim but possible chance you are investing real money. And why do I bring this up? Because if you are, as an agent, you're not expected to be an inspector, you're not expected to know a lot about the construction of a house. But if you see things that are suspect, bring it up. Because as I'm walking through, I'm looking at the roof, right? When I'm walking up to the house, and I'm saying, you know, I see those shingles are curling. Man, this thing looks pretty beat up. You know that's going to come out on inspection. If the seller says no, are you going to be salty about the fact that you spent money on inspections for a house you didn't end up with because you are insisting that they replace the roof when they chose not to? Or if you're looking at a fuse panel and it's, you know, rather than a circuit breaker box, if you're looking at other stuff, you know, you get a little bit of an eye for this stuff. Not that you're an inspector, but know that, you know, the inspections are going to be tough on this house. And sometimes you can't anticipate that, right? It just happens, and there's things you couldn't have anticipated. But in any event, if the seller says they're not willing to negotiate and you're not willing to move forward, you are going to be out these costs whether we close or not. So in so many words, you're going to prep your clients for those things.